one by one, and there were only 12 hours left until weigh-in. Ju Jajiang had to lose 7 kilograms within 12 hours. Jim Dan worried that forcing his weight down so hard in such a short time would be more than fighter Ju's body could withstand. But only by dropping weight quickly could he refill it before the day of the match. At this stage, he could only dehydrate first, so today would be the hardest day to endure. If he couldn't cut enough, he would have no right to enter the ring. To force the water out faster, Ju Jajiang could only soak in hot water over and over, then wrap himself up in a blanket when he came out. Wrap himself up in a blanket again. That was how he brutally accelerated the dehydration. As soon as the water came off, his whole body looked visibly thinner. It was the first time Jim Dan had seen fighter Ju like this. Watching Ju Jajiang mechanically repeat these steps, Jim Dan's heart ached. When wiping him down, he didn't even dare lift his eyes. "What's that look on your face?" Ju Jajiang noticed it at a glance. Being called out made Danhwa jump in fright. "I just think, this is too pitiful." These words set Ju Jajiang off at once. He didn't listen to Jim Dan's explanation at all. He directly kicked Jim Dan out. Even the coach next to him couldn't stand it anymore and scolded him on the spot, asking why he had to treat Dr. Dan like that. Jim Dan said, "It's fine," out loud. But the very next second, he still turned around and left in pain. Before the finals, Ju Jajiang successfully made weight at 184 pounds. And the whole arena instantly erupted. Everyone was waiting for his showdown with the fighter Domini. Right after weighing in, Ju Jajiang immediately went all out and stuffed himself with a pile of delicious food. After drinking his supplements, he finally felt like he had come back to life. In an instant, his whole body felt clear-headed, and even his breathing became easy. At this rate, he would be able to return to normal very soon. Just then, a sudden knock sounded at the door. It was staff members, who had come because they knew fighter Ju Jajiang had been cutting weight this time. So they had specially brought a batch of nutritional supplements to help with his recovery. The coach was taken aback. Hadn't the share for In Jiang already been finished? Jim Dan wanted to return the extra, but the coach said that this kind of thing often ends up with leftovers, and they even give extra, so he told Jim Dan to drink some as well to replenish his strength. Everyone urged him warmly, so Jim Dan couldn't bring himself to refuse again, so he tipped his head back and gulped it all down. For the sake of tomorrow's match, the coach told everyone to go to bed early tonight. But on the way back, Jim Dan suddenly felt that something was wrong. His body started to feel very strange, as if there were a fire burning inside. The next second, he collapsed straight onto the ground. After drinking the supplement, Jim Dan actually took the initiative to go to fighter Ju and ask for some cuddling. On the way back, Jim Dan had already noticed something was wrong with his body. Right after that, he collapsed on the spot. When Gamja and Noramiori noticed, they rushed over and asked what was wrong. Then they helped him back to his room. His forehead was burning hot, like a ball of fire heated until it turned red. Jim Dan thought he had caught a cold. He'd felt a bit dizzy just now, and lying down already made him feel much better. But the two of them looked at him and still felt something was off. The more they thought about it, the more nervous they got, worrying it might be an allergy or that he'd eaten something strange. But after going over everything in their heads, they still couldn't remember anything. Just then, Gamja suddenly remembered that nutritional supplement. Could it be that? Jim Dan also felt that was very likely, because some people had gotten a fever after drinking supplements before, but Noramiori suddenly went quiet and started thinking carefully. Protein might cause an allergic reaction, but that bottle just now had clearly been for hydration. To be safe, Noramiori still urged Jim Dan to go to the medical center for a checkup, but Jim Dan didn't want to trouble anyone. Jim Dan said that he already felt much better lying down now, and that if he still felt unwell after a nap, he would go. But as soon as he heard that Noramiori was going to tell the coach and Ju Jajiang about this, Jim Dan shot up. "It's enough that you two know about this. Don't distract the athlete in the capital because of me. What matters most is tomorrow's match. We absolutely must not disturb everyone's rest." He urged the two of them again to hurry up and sleep, so they could only back down for now. They said, "If you feel unwell in the middle of the night, we'll go with you to the medical center." After saying that, the two of them fell asleep almost instantly. Only Jim Dan was left in the room, tossing and turning, feeling even worse than before. He felt his whole body pulsing, as if he could hear his heartbeat from head to toe. Could the supplement have this kind of side effect too? Unable to endure it any longer, Jim Dan had no choice but to go to the bathroom. He thought that this way he would finally be able to get a good sleep, but only 10 minutes later, things got even worse instead. Jim Dan wanted to go to the bathroom one more time, but then he saw Gamja suddenly sit up. Turned out Gamja also needed to go to the bathroom. The sight made Jim Dan's heart tighten with fright. Just then, Jim Dan received a message from Ju Jajiang, telling him to come over at 11. But it had only just passed 9 o'clock. At this moment, Jaeyoung was still in his room thinking about tomorrow's match. In his head, he was replaying his opponent's usual moves over and over. Suddenly, a series of knocks on the door cut his train of thought off completely. Hearing the knocking, Jaeyoung sprang to his feet, his temper flaring up at once, even thinking, if they dare to bother me, I'll make them regret it. But who could have expected that the moment he opened the door, Jim Dan would throw himself straight at him. Ha! Jaeyoung was dumbfounded on the spot. Wasn't it still before 11? He was just about to lose his temper, but suddenly realized that something about Jim Dan today was not quite right. With the help of the supplements, Jim Dan successfully got Jaeyoung. As soon as Jaeyoung opened the door, he was pushed down by Jim Dan. Looking at Jim Dan in this state, he only thought, this guy is really crazy. Normally he looks like he both hates him and is afraid of him, yet today he suddenly starts acting cute, so outrageously that it leaves one speechless. He smiled faintly, but inwardly he was secretly delighted. Then what if I refuse? I don't want to work right now. Seeing Jim Dan's confused face, Jaeyoung felt even more excited inside. If you really want it, then come at 11. Didn't I tell you to come at 11? Jim Dan couldn't understand. Starting work earlier, is that not okay? But Jaeyoung used, I'm in a bad mood, as an excuse and directly turned Jim Dan down. As soon as Jim Dan heard that, he panicked, tears falling one by one. He didn't want to disturb player Ju either, but if he didn't work, he really felt unbearably miserable. Seeing how serious Jim Dan was, Jaeyoung decided to be magnanimous and help him this once, but on the condition that they would see how Jim Dan performed first. So Jim Dan immediately got busy and threw himself into work. With Jim Dan acting so out of character, Jaeyoung found it really amusing and asked him if he had eaten something wrong. But Jim Dan didn't answer, only urging him to hurry up and get into work mode. Jaeyoung burst out laughing after listening. That was the first time he had ever seen Jim Dan like this. So he agreed to Jim Dan's request, and Jim Dan finally got what he wanted, as if he had become himself again. Halfway through the job, when Jim Dan wanted to catch his breath, Jaeyoung wouldn't allow it. He wouldn't even let him go to the bathroom. At this moment, player Jaeyoung only wanted to focus on finishing the job. Jim Dan hadn't expected this round of work to turn out so different. He couldn't hold back for a moment and planted a hickey right on Jaeyoung's face. That one move left Jaeyoung dumbfounded on the spot. He had just opened his mouth, about to curse, when Jim Dan suddenly confessed, but Jaeyoung only took it as drunken nonsense. The next second, a wave of dizziness washed over Jim Dan, and whatever he had just said was completely wiped from his memory. Right now, all he wanted was to keep working with Jaeyoung. Nothing else mattered. Jaeyoung forcefully shielded his own. With a single "he's mine," he firmly pinned little Jim Dan's heart in place. With a faint smile, after working non-stop all night, he went straight into the bathroom for a shower early the next morning. He even remembered to spray on his favorite perfume. After finishing his milk, he headed out early. Looking at how deeply Jim Dan was sleeping, the corner of Jaeyoung's mouth lifted, and he smiled in satisfaction. I don't know how long it had been before Jim Dan groggily opened his eyes, wondering why he was in this room. It felt like he had been here just yesterday, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember clearly. The moment he saw the time, he panicked instantly. There was a match at 11 o'clock. No matter how much his back hurt, he couldn't care. He grabbed his clothes and rushed toward the arena. The arena had been ready for a while. Jim Dan arrived only by jogging all the way. Player Ju was in the middle of getting ready to go on stage. Jim Dan found Gamja first and said that he was late and was really sorry. Gamja patted him and said it was fine. The match had only just begun, and Brother Jaeyoung was in great shape. He'd heard that you rested in Brother Jaeyoung's room yesterday, and he specifically told us not to wake you, to let you sleep a bit more. After hearing this, Jim Dan clearly panicked for a moment and hurried to say that he was already fine now. Hearing that, Gamja immediately turned around and dashed straight into the cheering crowd. But Jim Dan still couldn't stop worrying about player Ju's shoulder injury. It looked much better. Still, he felt like such an idiot for sleeping so long on such an important day. The match started very quickly. As soon as player Domini came on, he unleashed a big move, going straight for Jaeyoung. Jaeyoung chose to defend first. After that, he began to counter. The whole venue had been waiting for this showdown. Player Domini was a top-tier fighter. Although Jaeyoung was also a light heavyweight champion, there had recently been rumors that he was competing with an injury. Today's fight is all about proving how much strength fighter Jaeyoung still has left. so this match is practically hell-level difficulty. Fighter Domini lands an elbow punch squarely on Ju Jajayong. Right after that comes an uppercut, yet Zhou still doesn't go down. But Zhou gets hit in the eye. The corner of his eye is torn open, blood is pouring badly. His vision can easily be blocked, and the slightest mistake could get him knocked out. That strike scares Jim Dan so much that his heart turns cold. As soon as the next round starts, fighter Ju Jajayong begins throwing punches like crazy. Fighter Domini seems to have noticed his shoulder injury as well. He focuses all his firepower and launches a fierce attack on fighter Ju Jajayong's left shoulder. Fighter Ju Jajayong can only keep defending. Then, he seizes the moment. He launches a swift counterattack. With a single punch, he sends fighter Domini crashing down to the canvas. The match is over. Ju Jajayong wins. Once again, in front of everyone, he proves himself. He's always been someone who finishes fights quickly, but this time, he dragged it all the way into the 4th round. Fighter Domini comes forward to offer his congratulations. This really was a spectacular match. Right then and there, Gamja is so stunned by brother Zhejiang's handsomeness that she wants to cry, her eyes turning red. The heart Jim Dan had been holding in suspense finally settles at this moment. All because of that one line, "He's mine." The moment the match ends, Jim Dan is taken away on the spot. On the way back, the coach patted Ju Jajayong on the shoulder and said he did well, that he actually managed to beat the player Domini. Ju Jajayong only felt that this match had been really exhilarating. The coach asked how his shoulder was, and Ju Jajayong said it was fine now. Just then, Gamja rushed over to report to the coach. Dr. Dan had been taken away by security. The coach frowned and said it was most likely to cooperate with the investigation into the supplement incident. At that moment, Jim Dan was being interrogated. "According to our understanding, you drank a nutritional supplement yesterday. This supplement was not provided by us. It was given to you by an outsider, and a banned substance was added to it with the intention of causing trouble for the athlete during testing so they would be disqualified. We have already handed the supplement over to the testing department for component analysis. Next, we will also test your blood to confirm your reaction to the drug. Did you really only drink that one bottle of supplement yesterday? What specific symptoms did you experience? Do you remember what the person who gave you the supplement looked like? About what time did you receive the supplement?" Their barrage of questions came crashing down, but Jim Dan could barely understand them. Forcing down his panic, he opened his mouth to request, "Please find me an English interpreter." But the other party impatiently tapped the table. "This matter is very serious. We absolutely will not allow it to happen again. Right now, only you have seen the suspect. You are the sole eyewitness." At that moment, a bodyguard uncle went to ask the staff, "Is this the first time Jim Dan has appeared in athlete Ju Jajayong's team?" The staff said it was indeed the first time. The next second, that man's tone turned harsh. "Don't tell me you staged this yourself? Are you involved in this too?" Sensing that something was wrong with the atmosphere, Jim Dan hurriedly waved his hands. "No, I really don't know what you're talking about, sir." Just like that, Jim Dan was treated as a suspect, and for a moment he had no idea how to respond. He could only remind himself, as long as he didn't give a wrong answer, he wouldn't drag player Ju down. But they just kept pressing him step by step. Just as he was about to be forced into speechlessness, the door was flung open with a loud bang. "Hey, Jim Dan." Jim Dan froze. He hadn't expected player Ju to actually come looking for him. The security guards nearby immediately lost some of their momentum. Yesterday someone had tried to frame Jajayong, and now they were watching Jim Dan being bullied. Ju Jajayong completely lost his temper. "What on earth is your security team doing? You failed to protect the person, didn't prepare a translator, and now you're making things hard for an innocent person. Who gave you the right? If I really had drunk that bottle of supplement, would today's match have to be cancelled on the spot?" The security team apologized over and over. Just like that, Ju Jajayong took Jim Dan away. They had just reached the doorway when the security team blocked them again. "Wait a moment. We still need to investigate the relationship between you and Jim Dan. He's my person." Jim Dan's heart suddenly sank. He really hadn't expected Ju Jajayong to answer like that. On the way back, Jim Dan didn't say a word and just silently followed behind Ju Jajayong. It was Ju Jajayong who spoke first. "No wonder you were acting so strange yesterday. So it was because of the medicine? I'm sorry, player Zhou. By the way, is your shoulder all right?" The moment the reporters saw player Zhou, they all swarmed over, shutters clicking non-stop. "Player Ju Jajayong, please accept an interview." "Player Ju Jajayong, please accept an interview. What tactics did you use against player Domini? Please tell us how you feel after winning." Looking at the Ju Jajayong standing before him, what kept replaying in Jim Dan's mind was that scene from just now. He hardly understood anything else that was said, but there was one line he heard loud and clear. "My person, So in player Zhou's heart, he had already been placed in that position. The ridiculous thing was, he had never even dared to hope for it. Jim Dan's face flushed red all at once, and he thought that maybe it was time to admit it now. In front of this man who seemed to shine, he really had no resistance at all. Jim Dan was finally in love. For the first time, he bravely faced his own feelings. By the way, Danbo in love is just way too handsome. In the last episode, we mentioned that Zhu Zhejiang had successfully proven himself to everyone, that even if he was injured, nothing could stop him from winning. The appearance fee for the match also directly doubled because of this. Everyone in the venue was happy and enjoying the glory he brought. Watching Zhu Zhejiang win the match, Jim Dan was truly happy from the bottom of his heart. The next day, he went to the hospital to visit Halmiani and even gave her an outrageously expensive silk scarf. Halmiani really liked these gifts, but she was afraid he had spent too much money. Jim Dan comforted her, saying it was fine and not expensive. The caregiver next to them also received a souvenir and thanked him again and again. But in Jim Dan's heart, he thought, she takes care of Halmiani every day. The one who should really be saying thank you is me. Halmiani was curious about what the pretty country was like and whether it was really that good there. Jim Dan thought that next time he also wanted to take Halmiani to see it for herself, since it was really cool there. But when he heard that Halmiani had also watched the match, Jim Dan froze for a moment and couldn't help asking, Halmiani, where did you watch it? It turned out that Halmiani was afraid of missing the moment when Jim Dan's face appeared on TV. So she stayed and watched the entire match along with everyone else. Thanks to player Zhejiang in Seoul, our Dan can go to America. As Halmiani spoke, she was especially grateful to him and kept calling Jim Dan's name. Halmiani then earnestly reminded Jim Dan, however much you receive, you must give back just as much. You must do your best and take good care of everything related to player Zhu. Jim Dan reassured Halmiani, saying that he understood. It was just that Halmiani still had a checkup later, so Jim Dan went down to the front of the hospital building. The sunlight was blinding, dazzling like Zhu Zhejiang. The image of him kept flashing repeatedly in his mind. The moment he won the match, and also the moment he stepped forward to protect him. It was like something he just couldn't shake off no matter how he tried. Jim Dan realized that he really seemed to have fallen for player Zhu, but he still couldn't figure it out. Why did he have to fall for someone so eccentric and scary? But those words he said that day, maybe he had been denying his own feelings all along, and now he finally saw them clearly, and it was like his emotions suddenly overflowed. All this time, Jim Dan's mind had been filled entirely with player Zhu. So this is what it feels like to like someone, like blazing sunlight that you can't avoid no matter how you try to hide. As for that bottle of supplement, Zhu Zhejiang remembered it perfectly clearly. Having recognized his own feelings, Jim Dan got up early in the morning to make breakfast for Zhu Zhejiang. Danbo remembered the first time he met player Zhu. Back then, all he felt was fear. But now, the more he looked at Zhu Zhejiang, the more he felt that he was outrageously handsome. The next second, Zhu Zhejiang noticed that Jim Dan had been secretly stealing glances at him all along. He asked Jim Dan if he had something he wanted to say, and the caught red-handed Jim Dan was so startled that he could only hurry to change the subject. He asked Zhu Zhejiang if there had been any new developments recently in the supplement incident. Zhu Zhejiang said they were still investigating. So far, only the ingredient test report had come out, and stimulants had been added to it. The culprit still hadn't been caught. They speculated it might have been done by some anti-fan or the like, and only then did Jim Dan catch on. Zhu Zhejiang's tone was very arrogant. If he had really drunk that, the match would have been immediately canceled. If that guy ever falls into his hands, he'll definitely tear the other person to pieces. Hearing this, Jim Dan was so scared he tensed up and blurted out, "It's a good thing I was the one who drank it." The moment he said that, Zhu Zhejiang turned his head and stared straight at him. "You really don't remember what happened back then?" "I don't remember it very clearly. After I went to player Zhu's room, nothing went wrong, right?" Zhu Zhejiang let out a low laugh. That was quite an incredible mistake. After saying that, Zhu Zhejiang just said he was done eating, completely ignoring Jim Dan, who was anxiously trying to ask more. There were still 3 weeks left before Zhu Zhejiang's birthday, and the gymnasium had already received gifts of all sizes. Staring in a daze at the pile of gifts in front of him, Jim Dan said, stunned, "These are all birthday presents for player Zhu?" The coach said that was right and that even more would be delivered later. Jim Dan knew player Zhu was very popular, but he didn't expect that so many people would celebrate Zhu Zhejiang. The coach said these gifts weren't just from domestic fans, but also from overseas fans. Every year he told everyone not to send anything, but it still piled up like this, so he could only have Jim Dan help move everything. So every time Zhu Zhejiang's birthday came around, the entire gymnasium would be especially excited, and even the others could benefit and get a few things. Jim Dan thought to himself that with so many gifts, Ju Jaeyoung must be happy. But the coach said that because he had to take photos as proof, he actually hated all this. Looking at the pile of gifts stacked like a small hill, Ju Jaeyoung felt a headache coming on. He'd already told them not to send such useless things. He asked the coach how the plan for donating the birthday gifts was going. The coach said it was already underway, and the fans were participating as well. As soon as Gamja heard that, he shouted, "In Jaeyoung, you're way too cool." But beside him, Jim Dan just watched for a long time. Jim Dan, standing to the side, watched for a long time. Suddenly, he turned around and left. Since it was Ju Jaeyoung's birthday, he also wanted to give him a present. The coach asked Ju Jaeyoung how he was feeling, and whether he should take a break for a while, since he was competing again so soon. But Ju Jaeyoung felt it was fine. He then went straight into sparring. There was something clearly wrong with his left shoulder. Jim Dan noticed it too. The next second, he stepped forward and called a halt. Took Ju Jaeyoung to the treatment room. Jim Dan had only just lightly lifted his shoulder. Ju Jaeyoung's body tensed up in pain in an instant. He said coldly for Jim Dan to let go. Jim Dan was just about to say that his left shoulder seemed even worse than before, but before he could finish, he was cut off by Ju Jaeyoung. There was no problem at all when he was throwing punches. Ju Jaeyoung himself knew very well. It was in that previous match that his shoulder got injured, and it was no minor injury. Jim Dan wanted to drag Ju Jaeyoung to the hospital to get it checked again, but Ju Jaeyoung had no intention of going at all. After the match, he had already had a physical, but Jim Dan still felt this would affect the fight, and that Ju Jaeyoung clearly needed long-term treatment now. But Ju Jaeyoung only grew more impatient. Didn't they say nothing was wrong during the physical? The match is almost here. Are you telling me to cancel it? Stop going on and on. It's my body. I know it best, so cut the crap and hurry up and wrap the bandage. But Jim Dan was still so nervous he could hardly stand it. If you just grit your teeth and push through like this, will it really be okay? Jim Dan truly loved Ju Jaeyoung to the point of desperation, working himself to the bone just to buy a birthday present for fighter Ju. He worked himself to death during the day, and at night he also worked a side job delivering food. As mentioned in the previous episode, although he won the match in the capital, his shoulder injury was only getting worse and worse. Jim Dan flipped through Ju Jaeyoung's previous examination records and noticed that the injury on Ju Jaeyoung's shoulder was more obvious than before, and his current condition was very bad. Now it wasn't just the shoulder. Even other parts of his body didn't seem right, and it was definitely very painful. If only he could take a long vacation or receive regular treatment. But thinking of athlete Ju's previous attitude, this was probably completely impossible. Jim Dan sighed softly. All he could do was help him control the pace as much as possible, so that other parts of his body wouldn't get hurt on top of existing injuries. What else could he do? He stared at the date on his phone. Looking at the date on his phone, Jim Dan suddenly remembered. It was almost athlete Ju's birthday. If he prepared a present for him, would that maybe give him a bit more motivation? What gift should he give? He had to decide right away. He had always been the one who was unilaterally taken care of by him, so this time he had to seize the opportunity and give him something decent. After he got home, Jim Dan started searching around. Was there anything athlete Ju was still lacking? Was there anything worn out or broken? But after circling around once, he didn't find anything. Everything in this house was expensive and high quality. Only he himself was like a shabby exception. At last, he found a car keychain that had been worn white. Jim Dan decided to buy an identical one and give it to Ju Jaeyoung. As a weekly player, he ought to buy a name brand one to be worthy of his status. Jim Dan picked up his phone to search for the same model by taking a photo, and originally thought that since it was so small, it definitely wouldn't be expensive. He had no idea until he checked. Once he did, he was stunned on the spot. A monogram car key. He hadn't expected this monogram car key to cost 700,000 won. But he had already spent his money on buying a gift for Helmiani. Then he thought about it again. He was still in an advanced pay state now, with no salary issued yet, and nowhere else to spend money, no housing costs, so he had never really taken the money seriously. It was only when he actually needed to use it that he realized he suddenly needed so much. If he had known earlier, he should have taken on a side job in advance. As this thought flashed by, Jim Dan's mind lit up. Just do a side job. But now, there wasn't much time left. He searched around on his phone and finally decided to deliver food and to run orders after work in the middle of the night. Just thinking about how player Ju would be happy when he received the gift fired Jim Dan up completely. He didn't feel tired at all. It's said that when love rivals meet, their gazes burn hot. While delivering food, Jim Dan just so happened to run into Ju Jaeyoung's ex, Mayak Hyung. In order to prepare a birthday present for Ju Jaeyoung, Jim Dan decided to secretly take a part-time job delivering food at night. riding his bicycle back and forth through the city every day. Gil-lu also rode a bicycle back and forth through the city every day. It was really exhausting, but the income was fairly decent. This way, he should be able to save enough money before the birthday. The coach said that athlete Ju Jajiang's shoulder condition makes it very hard for him to keep competing. Right now, all they can do is try their best to keep him from using that shoulder. More than training and competing, he needs rest, but he himself refuses. If this keeps dragging on, he'll have to get surgery. But it just so happens that the best hospital in the country is currently in a lawsuit. In the supercar, Jim Dan asked player Ju if he was going to train again. Jim Dan wanted him to rest more. The teacher just said that he can't do too much exercise anymore. But Ju Jajiang slammed his fist on the car. Can you go out there and compete in my place? If you can't, then shut up and just do what you're supposed to do. So Jim Dan had no choice but to stop trying to persuade him. But he still couldn't stop worrying about Ju Jajiang's injury. That night, Jim Dan still went out to deliver food like usual. To buy something beyond his means, he really was asking for trouble. But now he could better understand how hard things are for an athlete. Athletes earn a lot and are famous, but behind that they have to spend even more time training. He's defended his title for so many seasons. Just how heavy must that pressure be? Compared to him, this bit of exhaustion of his is nothing at all. Jim Dan silently cheered himself on in his heart. But the person who came out to pick up the delivery looked very familiar to Jim Dan. It was that Myong-nam who had been at player Ju's house before. When Myong-nam saw him, he also froze for a moment. Have I seen you somewhere before? The next second, he reacted, so you were the one who was at player Ju Jajiang's house that time. The world really is small. Here you go. I was actually going to ask if you were still dating Ju Jajiang, but it doesn't look like it. You've even started running delivery now. Huh. Jim Dan was a bit speechless. This doesn't really have anything to do with him, does it? But Myong-nam kept on mocking him. Looks like Ju Jajiang doesn't give you any money to spend. I still made a few hundred after getting beaten up that day. Are you really that short on cash? Jim Dan was even more confused. He went on, Ju Jajiang is indeed very strong, but his character is awful. He's just a lunatic. That sentence set Jim Dan off on the spot. Please don't talk about the player like that. Here is your change. The man snatched the money away. I'll give you one last piece of advice. Your ending will be the same as mine. So don't foolishly expect Ju Jajiang to give you anything. Everyone who follows him ends up the same. You're all just his tools. Once he gets tired of you, he'll throw you away. You won't be an exception. What he's best at is using people up and then tossing them aside. Jim Dan was so scared he couldn't get a single word out. Looking at Dambua's expression, did he believe what Myong-nam said? 1500. Is there going to be another round of torment next? Ju Jajiang, you finally did something impressive. Getting drunk and then directly making a domineering declaration of ownership. In the previous episode, it was mentioned that Jim Dan happened to run into Maya Kaiyong. The man's words echoed in his ears again and again. Could he really be Ju Jajiang's plaything, to be thrown away once used? Click. Jim Dan's foot slipped, he lost his balance, and fell straight to the ground, even tearing his pants. He really wanted to tell himself Ju Jajiang would not abandon him, but he also knew that was almost impossible. Maya Kaiyong, isn't he the most realistic example? Early the next morning, he gave Ju Jajiang physical therapy. The pain as soon as he pressed down made Ju Jajiang frown despite himself. And Ju Jajiang's shoulder also accidentally got stained with color. Only then did Jim Dan realize it was because he hadn't bandaged himself properly. He apologized at once, then hurried to wipe the mark off Ju Jajiang. But when mealtime came, there was still no sign of Dr. Dan. And when Ju Jajiang listened to what everyone said, Jim Dan hasn't been eating dinner lately, and whenever you see him, he's always sleeping. This made Ju Jajiang feel more and more that something was wrong. The day before Ju Jajiang's birthday, the gift Jim Dan bought finally arrived on time. He knew player Ju had received many gifts, but Jim Dan still wanted to hand his over in person. There was also a sheet of letter paper placed inside the gift box. Jim Dan decides to write something on it, but he has only written half when he is suddenly interrupted by Ju Jajiang's shout. Are you not going to work? Get out here. This sentence startles Jim Dan so much that he shudders and immediately hides the card. Just as the two of them step into the gym, party poppers and streamers go off at the same time. Jinjiang, happy birthday in advance. Hyung, you'll probably be very busy tomorrow, so we're giving you a surprise first. Right after that, everyone enthusiastically starts singing the birthday song. But Jinjiang doesn't look happy at all. What are you doing? That sense of pressure instantly scares everyone into freezing on the spot. And it's the coach who quickly comes out to smooth things over. Jinjiang, don't be so tense. Just enjoy yourself today. This is the birthday everyone prepared for you. so don't be mad. Ju Zhejiang looks completely disdainful as he raises his hand to wipe the cream off his cheek. Then he picks up a strawberry and stuffs it into his mouth. Hurry up and eat. Once you're done, get ready for training. Ju Zhejiang gets drunk and even shows off his love loudly. The sweet little storyline is finally about to begin. In the previous episode, we saw everyone celebrating Ju Zhejiang's birthday. In the evening, everyone goes to their usual barbecue restaurant for a group dinner. Everyone is smiling and raising their glasses in celebration. But Ju Zhejiang just won't stop, because he's way too popular. It's all fans. I'm a fan. So a whole bunch of people line up to take photos with him. Ha ha ha, the coach suddenly lets out a sigh. He feels that Jinjiang scheduled the match in too much of a rush. He said to Jim Dan, after barely cutting weight, Ju Zhejiang finished the fight with Domini and immediately booked the next one. Even though he asked for it himself, I still think it's too harsh. Jim Dan wondered if it was because of the injury, and the coach said, that's part of the reason, but not the only one. Ju Zhejiang's appearance fee has already hit the ceiling, but he's been rising too fast. If this goes on, he'll get seriously hurt sooner or later. No matter how strong a fighter is, one day he'll be defeated. But what the coach is afraid of is, the more he wins and chases the next win, the more he'll start to become afraid. Jim Dan also thought that was possible. He was worried about Ju Zhejiang too, because Ju Zhejiang hates losing. He always seems to be forcing himself to tough everything out. At this point, the coach suddenly got emotional. Every time I tell him to take care of his body, he won't listen. I'm doing this for his own good. Still, Zhejiang seems to get along really well with Teacher Dan. His competitive level really did improve quickly after Teacher Dan came, and we're all very grateful to Teacher Dan. That kid Zhejiang too, I'm sure he's also very grateful to you, he's just not very good at saying it. After listening, Jim Dan felt a bit shy and said he would work even harder. Yep, then the coach poured Jim Dan a cup of soju. Afraid of drinking too much, Jim Dan poured a little of it into his water cup. 20 minutes later, Ju Zhejiang came back and sat down. You finished eating that fast? Grill something cooked for me. As soon as he finished speaking, he casually picked up the glass of water on the table and downed it in one go. Beep. As soon as he finished drinking, he instantly exploded. What's going on? Who poured soju into my water glass? Are you looking for death? Jim Dan was scared silly on the spot. It's my glass. He then hurriedly handed Ju Zhejiang a glass of water. After they finished eating, the teammates asked Jim Dan to keep hanging out, and right next to them Ju Zhejiang's jealousy instantly went off the rails. He walked over and put his hand on Jim Dan's shoulder. You guys can scram now. Teacher Dan is coming home with me. Everyone was dumbfounded. Zhejiang is actually taking care of someone? That line also hit Jim Dan straight on, and his heartbeat went completely out of control. He turned his head to look at Ju Zhejiang. Is the player drunk? But he doesn't look like it at all. The next second, Ju Zhejiang slumped onto him. I'm drunk, you lead the way. Only then did Jim Dan react and realize that player Zhejiang was really drunk. Drunk Zhejiang and Jim Dan are absurdly sweet. I hereby announce that Ju Zhejiang gets bonus points for this episode on the spot. This kind of sweet interaction can be felt even through the screen. In the previous episode, it was mentioned that Jim Dan took the drunk Ju Zhejiang back home. All the way home, Ju Zhejiang kept cursing under his breath. Which bastard made him drink? He was so dizzy he could die. Jim Dan apologized as he admitted, it was me. As soon as they got home, the two of them were busy and flustered. Jim Dan had thought Ju Zhejiang would make things difficult for him, but once he got drunk, it was as if he'd become a different person. When Jim Dan told him to change into pajamas, he obediently did as he was told. And he even wanted to casually change Damba's clothes as well. This was a side of him Jim Dan had never seen before. Player Ju, when drunk, was like a completely different person. Jim Dan took a deep breath and, bracing himself, thought, maybe this is a good chance to get to know him. Then Jim Dan realized that Ju Zhejiang's weak spot was actually his ears. Even more surprising, Ju Zhejiang didn't get angry. This was the first time Jim Dan had ever seen him like this. Someone so dominant, yet because he was such a lightweight, he loosened up like a proud cat that had lost control. He was so cute that Jim Dan couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. Right after that, a wave of dizziness hit Ju Zhejiang, and riding on the alcohol, he spoke to Jim Dan. Why have you been so irritating to look at lately? Always bothering me, making me so conscious of you. Jim Dan's eyes instantly widened. Was this what he thought it meant? Jim Dan even wished that time could just stop at this very second. So player Ju was actually this warm, and he had never known before. Every single one of his expressions made Jim Dan like him to the point of losing control. The next second, however, Ju Jaeyoung flared up in anger and directly smashed the birthday present that Jim Dan had given him. Danhwa's little token of affection was thus ruthlessly hurled to the floor by him. Shattered on the ground was not only the gift, but also Jim Dan's heart. After returning home, the two of them began to share their thoughts and experiences. Early the next morning, Ju Jaeyoung was awakened by the sunlight. As soon as he opened his eyes, he realized there was someone lying behind him. He recalled everything that had happened the previous night. His brows knitted, and Ju Jaeyoung's expression instantly turned cold. She got up, walked over to the fridge, and rummaged for something, her whole body groggy. Honestly, she shouldn't have drunk last night. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It was the delivery guy. Seeing the pile of packages stacked at the door, Ju Jaeyoung was completely stunned. At this moment, Jim Dan also slowly woke up. Thinking back to the previous night, Danhwa shyly wriggled around under the blanket. That kind of warmth was something he had truly felt for the first time. After that, the ringtone of his phone suddenly rang, and Jim Dan picked it up to take a look. It was finally Player Ju's birthday. At least today, I want to be the first one to put my present into his hands. But the moment he opened his eyes and saw that entire wall of gifts, he was completely stunned on the spot. There were even more gifts than last time by a long shot. Player Ju, you don't look so well. I'll go make you a bowl of hangover soup. Ju Jaeyoung held his forehead. The gym had sent all the gifts straight to the house. These expensive things are completely useless. Jim Dan felt a bit awkward. Didn't that mean the gift he'd prepared had become redundant? But when he thought of how well Player Ju had been taking care of him lately, Jim Dan still decided to muster his courage and find the right moment to give it to him. He went first to make hangover soup for Player Ju. Seeing those few red spots on Jim Dan's neck that looked like mosquito bites, Ju Jaeyoung instantly lost his cool. Lowering his voice, he muttered that he really must have lost his mind. After drinking the hangover soup Jim Dan had made, Ju Jaeyoung's head still hurt, and Danhwa planned to go buy some painkillers in a bit. Jim Dan felt that now was the perfect chance to give the gift. Jim Dan clenched the gift bag behind his back even tighter. He took a deep breath and pulled it out. Player Ju, this is the birthday present I prepared for you. Player Ju turned his head to look at him. In an instant, Jim Dan felt his heart racing out of control. Ju Jaeyoung accepted the gift. Then he let out a derisive snort. The next second, he slammed the keychain hard onto the floor. Jim Dan didn't even have time to open his mouth. Ju Jaeyoung spoke first in an icy tone. Keeping my condition in order is what you should be doing. Ju Jaeyoung, act like a decent human being. Not only did you lose your temper at Jim Dan like that, you even threw away the gift Danhwa specially prepared for you right in front of him. In the last episode, it was said that Jim Dan seized the right moment and handed the gift to Ju Jaeyoung. Ju Jaeyoung frowned slightly and asked with some doubt, "Is this a designer brand you bought?" Jim Dan was a bit embarrassed. "It's very small. For Player Ju, it probably doesn't mean much." Ju Jaeyoung picked up the keychain and looked at it twice. "How did you buy it? Aren't you broke?" Jim Dan said it was money he'd earned from a side job after work recently, going out to work late at night. As soon as Unrequited-love heard this, his expression immediately darkened. "What kind of side job are you doing?" Jim Dan said softly, "I'm doing food delivery as a part-time job because I was afraid of disturbing your rest. I only went out after you fell asleep." All of a sudden, Ju Jaeyoung remembered that Jim Dan had hurt his hands while giving him treatment before, that he always skipped lunch, was always drowsy during the day, and that every night when he went to sleep, there would be strange door slamming sounds that woke him up. "So you've been such an eyesore lately, all because of your side job?" Jim Dan clenched his fingers. "I saw that the keychain on your car keys looked a bit old, so I wanted to buy you a new one. I'm sorry if it bothered you." Ju Jaeyoung stared at that keychain, a hint of amusement in his eyes. But in the next second, he suddenly raised his voice and questioned him. "Who told you to buy this? Just do your job properly? Why are you doing this kind of useless thing?" With that, he hurled the keychain heavily to the ground. But that was Jim Dan's sincere gesture. It has to be said, Unrequited-love was really asking for it. He even twisted the knife. "Did you think I'd be happy to receive this?" Jim Dan felt so dejected he went blank. Yet he kept apologizing over and over. Just as Ju Jaeyoung started to get up, clack clack, Jim Dan quietly explained, "Since it's your birthday, clack clack, I wanted to give you something too, clack clack." But that Unrequited-love said he didn't need it and told Jim Dan to just take care of himself first. Then he walked away without even looking back. Jim Dan stood where he was, holding it in for a long time before finally speaking. "Even if I know it's overreaching, I still want to tell the player how I feel." When Ju Jaeyoung heard this, he froze completely. He walked up to Jim Dan, stared at him and asked, What feelings? It can't be what I'm thinking, right? This isn't some kid's make-believe game. Jim Dan stayed silent for a long time, and in the end still couldn't say it out loud. He only said, "During this period, player Zhou has taken good care of me, so I wanted to say thank you." But Zhu Zhejiang suddenly exploded. "Jim Dan, I hired you as my personal physical therapist. Do you think I want something like, thank you, from you? Listen carefully. I let you live with me. I pay your medical bills. I help you pay off your debts. Also that you won't do unnecessary things and will just do your job properly. I've made myself clear." The next second, he flung the keychain straight away, and Danbo was so scared that he jolted violently. "If you've got nothing to say, then recognize your place and work seriously. All you need to do is focus on managing my condition." Jim Dan was so frightened by his attitude that he didn't even dare to breathe heavily. Zhu Zhejiang turned and left. "If you do that again next time, I'll replace you immediately." Jim Dan couldn't get out a single word of rebuttal. He just quietly looked at the keychain on the ground. Jim Dan was so sad that tears fell. From the moment Zhu Zhejiang threw the birthday present onto the floor, Jim Dan completely saw his own place clearly. Zhu Zhejiang even warned him, "If you do this kind of meaningless thing again, I'll replace you." Jim Dan stood there in a daze. "We agreed that no matter what I heard, I wouldn't get hurt, so why did I still shed tears? Was last night too warm? Is that why I unknowingly started to float? With just a little bit of warmth, my heart can't help but lean in that direction. But actually, all of this was fake. It was all the alcohol wreaking havoc. I was just overthinking it. It was simply an illusion." He bent down and picked up the discarded keychain. "I really looked like an idiot. I even thought I had become someone special to Fighter Zhu. That's why I did something so unnecessary." Fighter Zhu was right. Mayak Hyang was also right. I was the one who didn't know my place and crossed the line. I clearly understood everything, yet still tried to play dumb. At this moment, Jim Dan only felt that he was like a greedy idiot. He picked up the gift and forced himself not to feel disappointed. The next second, he threw the gift into the trash can. Maybe this sentiment had been meaningless from the very beginning. At the same time, Zhu Zhejiang was training at the boxing gym. His sparring partner was quickly beaten until he was completely exhausted. As soon as the guy said he wanted to rest for a while, he started hurling harsh words. "If you keep fighting like this, you can get the hell out." He even sneered as he said he'd competed in several national fighter tournaments and couldn't even last 4 rounds. What a waste of time. "Once you're out of here, don't tell anyone you're my sparring partner. It's embarrassing." That sentence scared the sparring partner so much he jolted. The teammates nearby also felt that Zhu Zhejiang was going too far. He was so angry he clenched his teeth, his whole body trembling. Then he suddenly stood up and shouted at Zhu Zhejiang, "So what if you're a world champion?" Zhu Zhejiang clearly hadn't expected the other guy to talk back. The sparring partner yanked off his gloves and slammed them on the ground. "I've only been putting up with you because you're older than me, but now, I really can't take it anymore." After saying that, he even deliberately provoked him, slamming his shoulder hard into Zhu Zhejiang's. "You think you're so tough? Don't go crazy just because you're the champion. Rein in that temper of yours." That one hit completely set Zhu Zhejiang off. Without saying a word, Zhu Zhejiang grabbed the man and gave him a brutal beating. Back in the locker room, the coach also tried to talk Zhejiang into toning down his temper. This was already the 3rd fighter to walk out this month. And if things kept going like this, it wouldn't be good for the gym's business. The other fighters would get dragged into it as well. But Nuljan Dweji just looked completely unconcerned. The coach added, "A lot of fighters have been digging for information lately, so it's very likely that someone will leak our game plans." So he told him to be extra careful. Zhu Zhejiang sneered, "You really think you can beat me with stolen intel? You guys just focus on doing your own jobs." There were less than 2 weeks left before the match. With that, Zhejiang pulled the door open and walked out. That made the coach so angry he nearly exploded. But he still couldn't shake his uneasiness. So he told Zhang Kochi to investigate whether there was a mole in the gym and to keep an eye on what was happening at the other gyms as well. Zhu Zhejiang was definitely their biggest target. He was the most famous one, so the bets on him were the largest. It was said that when Zhu Zhejiang won the match, that big-time gangster exploded on the spot. The big brother Black, who learned that Zhu Zhejiang had won the match, was furious. He pointed at his underlings and cursed them out. A bunch of useless trash. The underlings were so frightened that they apologized again and again. They decided to figure out anew how to deal with Zhu Zhejiang. The places that guy hit them last time still hurt like hell even now. Just then, the phone suddenly rang. It was a personal call from Cho Sejang. Because Zhu Zhejiang won this match, he over there directly lost quite a lot of money. The few of them fell silent in an instant, not even daring to breathe loudly. Cho Sejang told them to back off immediately, because this time he would step in personally. It was like he had already thought the whole path through, Would Jim Dan be pushed into an even more dangerous position because of this? Is Ju Jaeyoung about to embark on the chasing wife after burning the bridge route now? And with Jim Dan Halmiani's condition worsening, to what point will their relationship be forced? On the gymnasium side, Ju Jaeyoung's original opponent was confirmed unable to compete due to injury. They said something had happened during training. Everyone thought this match was going to be cancelled, but in the end, the opponent was directly changed to Baek Junmin, the fighter known as the King of the Gymnasium. As soon as one of the team members heard this, his expression changed. He was clearly stunned. Jim Dan couldn't find any information on him, so she had to press the fighter from just now. Do you know Baek Junmin? It's said that Baek Junmin is a newcomer who only just surfaced recently, with a very strong presence, and even the agency head is especially fond of him, to the point of arranging for him to go straight up against the champion. For a while, everyone was talking about it, because there were no match videos at all. No one could figure out how strong he actually was. Gamja objected on the spot. According to the rules, you should first put up a record before you're qualified to challenge the champion, right? How does some white-haired guy with such an average look get to fight Ju Jaeyoung? Everyone also felt a bit indignant inside, thinking that Baek Junmin was just a kid who hadn't really grown yet, and that Ju Jaeyoung could finish him off in a few moves. But there were also teammates who calmly said, sending Baek Junmin into the ring was probably just to stir up buzz. And now even the reports are out, Jaeyoung. The reporters all seem to be waiting for athlete Ju Jaeyoung to lose. At this moment, one of the fighters suddenly remembered. Baek Junmin is a legend of the local underground fight arena, and it's said he's never lost there. But this was only something he'd heard from a close buddy, so he didn't know if it was true. If the rumor was true, then Ju Jaeyoung wouldn't be able to win this match easily. And that guy even looks like some punk. Everyone, however, felt it didn't matter. Ju Jaeyoung usually isn't polite anyway, and that kid doesn't look like he has much match experience either. So Ju Jaeyoung will definitely win. Jim Dan also thought that fighter Ju would definitely win. Very soon, 6 in the evening arrived. Everyone started warming up, getting ready for the evening class. But for some reason, Jim Dan felt a bit worried about Ju Jaeyoung. The coaches were also helping player Ju study Baek Junmin's fighting style. But there was still too little information about Baek Junmin. Just watching videos didn't reveal any particularly special tactics. He was very likely the all-round type who changes strategy on the spot according to his opponent. The coach side, changing opponents at the last minute is indeed unsettling, but we still have to prepare well. Jaeyoung has a stronger build, so it's best to use grappling to wear him down first, then seize the moment to finish him with one blow. Another coach stared at the video and said, "He seems to be very good at offense." Everyone started talking over one another, but from beginning to end, Ju Jaeyoung didn't say a single word. This guy, the more Jim Dan looked, the more he felt that he looked a bit familiar. As Jim Dan Halmiani's condition worsened, Ju Jaeyoung and Jim Dan faced a new crisis. Jim Dan went back home alone. The house was clearly very big, yet it felt emptier day by day. On top of finishing player Ju's birthday, the opponent was suddenly changed, and he became even busier all at once. He left early in the morning and barely even had time to put on makeup. Even if they ran into each other once in a while, the two of them didn't talk. After what happened that day, Jim Dan didn't know what she should say to player Ju either. Maybe the safest thing was to keep her emotions out of it and just bury herself in finishing the work. Tomorrow is the day Halmiani's lab results come out. I hope everything will move in a better direction. Jim Dan stared at the photo of himself and Halmiani for a long time. He had been so busy lately that he didn't even have time to go to the hospital to see Halmiani. If Halmiani's condition could improve, that would really be wonderful. This was exactly the reason he worked so desperately. When Jim Dan smiled, he looked exactly like Halmiani. When Halmiani was discharged, he wanted to take her on a trip. In order to raise him, she had never gone anywhere and had spent almost her entire life just working. Lying on the bed, he was left with only one thought in his heart. He really wanted to see Halmiani as soon as possible. But in the end, Jim Dan's hopes still fell through. The tumor hadn't shrunk at all, and the new medication wasn't showing any obvious effect. Given the old woman's physical condition, she simply couldn't withstand a surgical removal. Halmiani was too old. At this point, no matter what medicine or treatment they used, it might all be useless. Jim Dan's eyes were red from crying. He looked at Halmiani lying in the hospital bed. His mind was filled with scenes from the past. Back then, Halmiani was still very young. Whenever there was something tasty, Halmiani would always give it to him first. When he fell down, the first person to feel heartache for him was always Halmiani. Life had been very hard, but they had truly been happy back then. But what should he do now? Was he going to become alone again? Halmini held his hand and softly asked him if he was hiding something on his mind. There were still his favorite red bean buns and yogurt left in the fridge. Halmini kept urging him to eat more while feeling distressed that he was always so thin. Jim Dan lowered his head, a tightness gripping his heart. Halmini must have been suffering a lot lately. Clearly, he should spend more time with her. But he kept worrying about his own matters and always used being busy as an excuse. Jim Dan finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He hugged Halmini and broke down in tears. At the same time, a new notification popped up on his phone. Please contact me when it's convenient for you. The sender was player Baek Junmin. Will Jim Dan be dragged into danger once again? Ju Jae-young discovered the photo of Jim Dan and the rival coach. Are we about to start the angst again this time? Is the angst really about to start again this time? In the previous episode, it was mentioned that when Jim Dan went to the hospital to see Halmini, he received a message from the opposing player, Baek Junmin. But right now, Donbwa doesn't want to go back at all. His mind is filled with nothing but Halmini. Jim Dan doesn't even dare to think. If there were no Halmini, what reason would he have to go on living? Just as he reached out to push the door open, an ajushi suddenly called out to him. The ajushi stopped him and came up to shove a business card into his hand. He introduced himself, saying he was Choi Gil-sai, a representative of a certain side, and that he wanted to invite Jim Dan to a meal. But Jim Dan rejected him outright, so the other party immediately revealed his trump card. You Halmini's current treatment outcome is not very ideal, right? Your mind is in chaos. I can understand that. My mother also passed away from illness, so I really understand how you feel. About your Halmini, I also have something to say. So, can we talk? The corner of the man's mouth lifted, his smile very faint. The corner of the man's mouth lifted, the smile carrying a hint of mockery. Jim Dan originally didn't want to pay attention to him, but was afraid of missing any clue about Halmini. So in the end, the two of them still went into the cafe. Jim Dan asked him how much he knew about Halmini. Had he investigated Jim Dan? But the man said he was very interested in Jim Dan, so he had casually inquired a bit. The teacher is very capable. This had already spread among the various gyms, and this time Baek Junmyeong was going to face the athlete Ju Jae-young. They said it was an honor, but also a lot of pressure, so they contacted Jim Dan, wanting to ask for advice on how to manage athletes. But Jim Dan only felt that something was off. Jim Dan told the other party to state his real purpose clearly. The man took a sip of coffee. I want to poach you to our gym, to have you be in charge of the condition of our key athletes. Jim Dan was clearly stunned, and the man continued, saying that if Jim Dan was willing, the annual salary could be double the current one, and they would also provide a car for convenient travel. But how could Jim Dan possibly leave? Ju Jae-young rejects him outright, and the corners of the man's mouth curl up. Your Halmini plans to. The corners of the man's mouth curl up. Your Halmini plans to. A chill runs down Jim Dan's back. The corners of the man's mouth curl up. Is your Halmini planning to try a new drug? Over at the domestic hospital, there's already nothing more they can do. A pharmaceutical company in the United States is developing a new drug, and the results are very good. But to bring it into the country will still take some time. Our gym is under an overseas agency that has connections with that pharmaceutical company. Through our channel, we can have your Halmini go to the US for treatment, and all the medical expenses will be waived. Jim Dan's heart begins to waver. The man keeps talking. If you feel that's too much of a burden, we can change the approach. You just need to tell us a bit of information, intel on the athlete Ju Jae-young, or the tactics for this match, or the injury status will do. Just like that, your Halmini can receive the best treatment. Thump. As long as he agrees, they will go all out to save Jim Dan's Halmini. Thump. He grabs the hand that Jim Dan has pressed on Jim Dan. He holds Jim Dan's hand, as if forcing him to seriously consider this proposal. Will Jim Dan, for the sake of Halmini, sell out Ju Jae-young? Is Ju Jae-young about to push Jim Dan to the brink of collapse again? Jim Dan actually met with the opposing coach in private. In the last episode, it was mentioned that Cho Gil-suk, under the pretext of giving Jim Dan's Halmini new medicine treatment, wanted Donbwa to reveal the tactics for this match, as well as detailed information about the injury. Halmini is everything to Jim Dan, but he would never betray player Ju because of this. He shook off Cho Gil-suk's hand on the spot. He refused very decisively. No matter what, he would never betray player Ju. This was completely beyond Cho Gil-suk's understanding. After all, many people beg for this kind of opportunity and still can't get it. Cho Gil-suk was so angry that he stood there yelling, but Jim Dan didn't even turn his head and just walked away. He had originally thought the other side wanted to talk about Halmini, but it turned out they wanted him to sell out information on player Ju. This guy must be crazy. Back home, Jim Dan was still thinking about how to do physical therapy for player Ju. The next second, the door suddenly sounded. It was Ju Jajiang coming back. Jim Dan felt a bit sorry for him. It was already 12 o'clock now. He must be exhausted. He got up wanting to give Ju Jajiang a massage to help him relax a bit and to explain what had just happened. But when he walked out, he discovered that Ju Jajiang was actually still watching match videos. He had thought Ju Jajiang was getting ready to sleep. He lowered his voice and called out Ju Jajiang once, startling Ju Jajiang into a jolt. Ju Jajiang asked him what he was doing there. Jim Dan said he wanted to give him a massage before bed. Lately things had been too busy, and relaxing the muscles would help him sleep more soundly. And besides, there were also some things he wanted to say to Ju Jajiang. But Ju Jajiang only said he was too busy and turned him down flat. Afraid that, as soon as he opened his mouth, he would distract Ju Jajiang from watching the video, Jim Dan could only swallow his words back down. He had originally wanted to bring up what happened that afternoon, but saying it would just seem like he was giving Ju Jajiang trouble for no reason. Jim Dan lowered his eyes, a chill spreading in his heart. Perhaps player Ju didn't care at all that he was going to work somewhere else. Right now, in Ju Jajiang's eyes, there was only the screen in front of him. Jim Dan only said, "Good night," then turned around and left. Ju Jajiang was still watching the match video. At that moment, however, a notification popped up on his phone. He picked it up and glanced at it. It was actually a photo of Jim Dan and the other party's representative together. Ju Jajiang's face instantly darkened. Jim Dan had actually met with the representative of Baek Junmin Jim. Wouldn't Ju Jajiang end up misunderstanding Jim Dan because of this? It was over. Ju Jajiang's medicine had been tampered with by the other side. After Jim Dan sprayed him, his injury actually worsened immediately. Noljin Dweji wouldn't suspect it was Jim Dan, right? That would be way too unfair to Jim Dan. On the first day of the competition, everyone was hurrying to the lounge. The coach asked how Jajiang's condition was. Ju Jajiang said it was okay, but as soon as he looked up, he ran head-on into an opposing player. The representative from the other side came up and grabbed Bak Kochi's hand, exchanging pleasantries with great enthusiasm. Ju Jajiang, however, kept staring at that old man who had met Jim Dan before. The moment Jim Dan saw Ju Jajiang, his heart suddenly tightened. He couldn't help but recall the meeting that day, but even that tiny reaction was clearly caught by Ju Jajiang. With a brain like Noljin Dweji's, he'd definitely think Jim Dan was feeling guilty. Just then, Baek Junmin called out to him, "Player Jajiang, it's an honor to compete with you." Ju Jajiang stared at him for quite a while. Only then did he, out of politeness, reach out and shake his hand. "Don't you remember me?" Ju Jajiang was even more surprised. Then the white-haired guy kept pressing in closer toward him. With his head lowered, he launched into a fierce tirade. After he finished cursing, Ju Jajiang's expression grew even darker, anger tightening his face. Not long after, the few of them dispersed. Ju Jajiang's hand, which was still hanging in midair, also at that moment, his hand suddenly clenched tight, his knuckles turning white. His face was dark the whole time. The coach thought he was just under too much pressure and comforted him, telling him not to worry. Everyone trusted him as well, but Ju Jajiang still didn't say a single word. All of this was clearly seen by Jim Dan. After they went back, Ju Jajiang's head was filled entirely with Baek Junmin. "Idiot. Someone like you deserves to be called a champion? Don't you remember what happened when we were kids? You're just a coward. I'll take that championship belt from you right away. You're not going to cry when you lose, are you?" The more Ju Jajiang thought about it, the angrier he got. So it was him. He should have just taken care of that guy on the spot. Although he didn't know what trick Baek Junmin was playing, he grit his teeth. But he would never admit defeat. The commotion broke out during training the next day. Jim Dan was carefully checking all of his personal items. Seeing him use the spray on himself, Gamja couldn't help but feel puzzled. Jim Dan explained that because of the previous incident with the supplements, he wanted to double-check everything. After that, Gamja helped him sort through things as well. But just then, Cho Gil-suk, who clearly came with bad intentions, walked in. The place instantly erupted into noise. He deliberately asked how Ju Jajiang's condition was, and even said that fighter Junmin was so nervous he hadn't slept all night. Bak Kochi felt that with the match just around the corner, for the sake of the fighter's condition, it would be better if he left first. The next second, Ju Jajiang exploded on the spot. "Hey old man, where do you think you are? You think you can just barge in? Get lost now." This sentence even gave Cho Gil-suk a fright, right at the very moment when the scene was the most chaotic. Someone secretly switched out Ju Jajiang's spray. Cho Gil-suk was also pulled away by the staff. Gamja was shaking with anger, really wanting to punch back. But with only 1 hour left before the match, he had to force himself to calm down. Ju Jajiang's face was just as ugly. "Those useless trash. All they know is to go crazy and stir up trouble. Ju Jajiang decided to do one more extra round of training with Yosep Hyong. After practicing for just a bit, he suddenly felt a sharp pain shoot through his ankle. Tap, tap. Jim Dan noticed something was wrong and asked if his ankle was uncomfortable, saying it might be due to overtraining. Ju Jajiang said it was fine, he just needed to spray some medicine. Jim Dan picked up that bottle of spray that had been switched. As soon as he sprayed it on Ju Jajiang, the redness and swelling on the ankle visibly flared up. Jim Dan froze on the spot. Ju Jajiang clutched his ankle in pain, his body trembling. Jim Dan stared at the medicine in his hand, his throat tightening, completely at a loss for how to explain. Can Ju Jajiang still go on stage and fight as normal? Can the undefeated legend, Ju Jajiang, still hold on to his championship belt this time? In the previous episode, it was mentioned that right after Ju Jajiang applied the medicine, his foot immediately felt like it was burned, turning red and swollen in an instant. Jim Dan was also scared stiff, completely flustered. His voice trembled as he explained that he had no idea why this was happening. But Ju Jajiang stared at him fiercely, gritting his teeth, as if he had already decided long ago that Jim Dan had betrayed him. On the spot, he loudly questioned Jim Dan about exactly what he had done to the medicine. The coach's expression also darkened. What on earth is this stuff? Teacher Dan, didn't you check whether there was any problem with the medicine? Jim Dan could not explain it either, his whole body shaking. He had clearly checked it just now and confirmed there was no problem. With less than 15 minutes left before the match, the coach was beside himself with anxiety. Enduring the pain, Ju Jajiang decided to finish applying the medicine, then strap on his ankle brace and force himself to compete. Jim Dan hurried forward, wanting to help him apply the medicine, but Ju Jajiang coldly flung him off, shaking him away. Don't touch me. So Ju Jajiang would rather go to the public treatment center than let Jim Dan treat him. At this point, the coach was nearly going crazy. Is this really going to be okay? Gamja originally wanted to comfort Dr. Dan, but the most important thing right now was Kyungji's match. Gamja was also full of confusion. Just now, he had clearly checked it together with Dr. Dan and confirmed there was no problem. After everyone had left, with a thud, Jim Dan fell to his knees on the floor. He choked up and burst into tears. Obviously, I was already being so careful. How could something like this still happen? The two of them were doing on-the-spot jogging as a warm-up before the match. But sharp-eyed spectators noticed that Ju Jajiang's ankle was injured, and everyone began to worry about the outcome of this match. Baek Junmin, however, had a look of "my vile scheme succeeded" on his face. As soon as the match started, Ju Jajiang quickly threw a punch, but Baek Junmin dodged it with a slight sidestep. It was as if he had completely figured out Ju Jajiang's style. Right at the start, he went straight in for a clinch, locking Ju Jajiang down tightly, and he deliberately went after Jajiang's injured ankle. The stab of pain came too suddenly, and Ju Jajiang's brow instantly furrowed. But Baek Junmin still didn't stop, because according to the official rules, attacking the instep doesn't count as a foul. The coach shouted anxiously, "Jajiang, break free of his hold." Quickly, Ju Jajiang immediately broke free, but blood was already oozing heavily from the instep. Up against such a despicable opponent, can Ju Jajiang still hold on to the championship belt this time? Jajiang just smiled. It's hard to say who'll win. Judging by that excited gleam in his eyes, it feels like the white hair is going to get beaten up badly. In the previous episode, we mentioned that Baek Junmin is very familiar with Ju Jajiang's fighting style. He exploits loopholes in the rules and focuses his attacks on Ju Jajiang's injured ankle. Faced with this shameless white-haired fighter, Ju Jajiang doesn't say a word and starts fighting right away. He hammers down several heavy punches in a row. Baek Junmin finally can't hold his guard and gets beaten badly. Ju Jajiang seems to get more and more fired up the more he fights. Just as he's about to throw another punch, the referee announces time. Halftime break. Ha! The coach stares at his injuries, his tone tight. Don't get too excited. Ha, whatever you do, don't get too close to that guy. On the other side, they're keeping their voices down too, quietly discussing tactics. The match resumes very quickly. As soon as Baek Junmin comes in, he moves first, grabbing Ju Jajiang straight around the waist. Ju Jajiang swings his arm and lands a heavy backhand blow on him. But Baek Junmin actually doesn't go down. Taking advantage of the momentum, he tackles Ju Jajiang to the ground. Ju Jajiang's injured shoulder slams hard against the floor. A sharp pain explodes all at once. Ju Jajiang's brows knit tightly in an instant. The coach feels his heart sink as he watches. He's targeting the injured left shoulder on purpose. This is deliberate. The next second, Baek Junmin tightens his choke on Ju Jajiang. "That's all you've got," he sneers. "Knew you were a coward. Knew you were a scaredy cat. That line completely sets Ju Jajiang off. He drives an elbow strike straight up into him and forcibly tears himself out of the other man's hold. His foot is still bleeding, and his shoulder aches so badly it's going numb. But Ju Jajiang only got more excited. Who are you calling a coward? If I weren't injured, this would have ended long ago. Come on then, coward. What came after just made people look forward to it even more, watching how Nuljandueji would beat the hell out of the white hair. But Ju Jajiang actually fought the white hair to a draw. For Nuljandueji, that was no different from losing. After the match, Jim Dan explained the reason to him, but he still suspected this whole thing was Jim Dan's doing. Even through the screen, I could hear Jim Dan's heart shatter, trembling. In the last episode, we mentioned how Baek Junmin racked his brains just to force Nuljandueji to admit defeat. But the more he messed around, the less Nuljandueji was willing to concede. He would absolutely never lose to this kind of trash. The fourth round started quickly. Bang! Ju Jajiang took the initiative and struck first, leaving Baek Junmin no time at all to fight back. The next second, Nuljandueji simply unleashed his ultimate move. The moment the spinning kick came out, the whole arena instantly exploded with excitement. Baek Junmin was kicked so hard he looked completely dumbfounded. The next second, he actually started laughing. Looked like he was about to use those dirty tricks again. He suddenly rushed forward and grabbed Ju Jajiang in a clinch. In the blink of an eye, he struck precisely at Ju Jajiang's injured instep. As soon as Ju Jajiang struck, he immediately slipped away, dodging cleanly and nimbly. The injury to Injiang's instep was even worse. The moment his movement slowed, he was kicked directly by Baek Junmin. Jolt! The pain from that kick nearly made Nuljandueji lose his footing, but he quickly saw through the opponent's intention and still swung his fist to counterattack. Seizing the chance, Baek Junmin mocked him. If it hurts, then rest. Don't force it. You're too slow. The fourth round ended quickly, and they went straight into the final round. Bang! The stamina of both fighters was almost depleted. With only 3 minutes left in the match, Baek Junmin kept landing effective strikes, forcefully closing the gap with Ju Jajiang. Gritting his teeth, fighter Ju Jajiang was too badly injured to dodge and could hardly throw a decent punch. Soon, the match was over. This was the most brutal match Ju Jajiang had ever fought. It was also the only match he did not win. In the end, based on the effective points on both sides, the two of them were ruled to have tied. This result was clearly unacceptable to Nuljandueji. To someone on a winning streak like him, a draw was the same as a loss. And that was how Baek Junmin stepped on him to climb up. He actually lost to a piece of trash. Ju Jajiang fought 5 matches in a row and still only managed to draw with that white-haired guy. To the ever-winning Nuljandueji, that was as good as a loss. He just couldn't believe it. That he would actually lose to a complete nobody. After returning to the locker room, he drove everyone out. He only kept Jim Dan there. Jim Dan lowered his voice to apologize, saying he should have double-checked. But just as he was about to explain the key point he and Gamja had checked, he was coldly cut off by Dweijiseki. You're a professional physical therapist, and you can't even verify something like this? I've long heard that Baek Junmin likes to plant lookouts in the gym to probe for match strategies, so you're the spy they planted, aren't you? Jim Dan was completely stunned. Little Guitar actually didn't believe him. He stammered in panic. It wasn't me. TCH, I know you met the representative from the other gym. Tell me, how much money did Baek Junmin give you? Looks like what I've given you up to now still wasn't enough. Jim Dan's eyes burned with grievance, on the verge of tears. I clearly already rejected him. Even if he offered me billions, I would never betray Nuljandueji. You still don't believe me? Looking into Jim Dan's pair of sincere eyes. Stop there. Nuljandueji hesitated for a second. Then he coldly ordered Jim Dan to get out of his sight at once. Yet he dragged his injured leg and walked off first. Only Jim Dan was left, standing there in a daze. Jim Dan couldn't figure out how things had ended up like this. He had clearly turned down the other side's representative, and he had checked the spray in advance, so how did something still go wrong? The misunderstanding Ju Jajiang had about Jim Dan was finally completely cleared up. But because he had misunderstood Jim Dan, he was slapped in the face on the spot by the coach. After some simple handling and treatment, the doctor told the coach that although player Ju's instep was bleeding badly, it would heal as long as it was properly treated. But the injury to his left shoulder was more troublesome and he had to be transferred to a higher-level hospital. Only surgery would work. The moment he heard that surgery was needed, Ju Jajiang immediately refused. That would mean not being able to compete for a long time, which he absolutely could not accept. The coach suppressed his anger and told him to listen to the doctor. At this moment, Baek Junmin, who was standing next to them, was wearing a look of smug satisfaction. He chimed in with the coach, deliberately provoking player Ju. Even the coach couldn't stand it anymore and was about to switch to another treatment room. But Baek Junmin just flat out declared, he's already the champion now. Next time, he won't hold back anymore. As soon as player Zhou heard that, he exploded on the spot, anger shooting straight up. Baek Junmin still wore that punchable grin and mocked Ju Jajiang, saying he was no longer the champion. Player Zhou sprang straight up from the bed. He rushed over and landed a blow on him. Crack, right after that came a full combo of punches. The coach saw what was happening and immediately rushed over to drag him back with all his strength. Even though his shoulder hurt like hell, he still couldn't suppress his urge to beat someone up at that moment. Before long, news of player Zhou hitting someone made it into the sports headlines. Using Zhou's need for shoulder surgery from now on as a reason, Baek Junmin had the medical institution issue a direct order. He was banned from competing for 90 days. When Gamja saw the report in the news, he was completely speechless. Just one defeat, and the media wrote about it like this. This was way too much. But what chilled him even more was that the gym was shockingly empty. He couldn't figure out why so few people had come to train today. Noramiori told him that it wasn't just today. It would stay this empty from now on, because as soon as the news that brother Jaeyoung lost got out, a lot of people ran over to Baek Junmin's side, and the terms offered over there by Baek Junmin were very tempting too. On top of that, with the competition ban this time, they felt that if they stayed with brother Jaeyoung, they wouldn't be able to learn anything anymore. Demiori was trembling with anger. How could they betray him just because he lost once? Little Gamja was furious too. Humph, these people really have no loyalty at all. With Gamja's explanation, Ju Jajiang finally understood that he had misunderstood Jim Dan. He wanted to go explain things to Jim Dan, but no matter how he searched, he couldn't see any sign of Jim Dan. In the previous episode, it was mentioned that Gamja felt that those who betrayed brother Jaeyoung were really disloyal. That night, someone called out to him and immediately asked, "Gamja, how have you been lately?" Gamja recognized him too. It was Seon Ho, the one who used to be brother Jaeyoung's sparring partner. Ever since that incident, the two of them had never been in contact again. Seon Ho brought Gamja back to the barbecue restaurant where they used to eat. But the people sitting in the restaurant were all the older guys from the old gym. Gamja wanted to leave the moment he saw them sit down first. He had no desire to eat at the same table as these people. But in the very next second, he heard a piece of news that made his scalp tingle. It turned out that manager Choi had already bet all the money on Baek Junmin, and they had even fixed the match. They had also secretly switched the medication to something else. Only at that moment did Gamja finally realize, so they had deliberately created chaos back then. Gamja immediately turned around and hurried back to the hospital. He told everyone everything from start to finish, not leaving out a single word. He had personally watched Dr. Dan examine the medication with his own eyes, so there was no way Teacher Dan was a spy. Only then did Ju Jajiang realize that he had wrongly blamed Jim Dan. The coach stood to the side and started cursing outright. You didn't even confirm what was real or fake and just lashed out at Dr. Dan. That's way out of line. But Nuljin Dweji felt that, in that situation, he also had no way to tell. And clearly, the one in the most miserable state right now was himself. The coach, fuming, raised his hand and gave him a fierce slap across the face. All of us have been worrying ourselves sick over you, and this is how you treat us? How can you be so cold-blooded, so heartless? As soon as he finished speaking, he broke down in tears again. The coach was talking and crying at the same time, and the beaten Jajiang also seemed to finally snap out of it. Only then did he realize someone was missing. He started asking everyone, "What is Jim Dan doing right now?" The coach's expression gradually darkened as well, as if he had just said something extremely heavy. It made the always calm Jajiang instantly lose his composure. Jim Dan decisively walked away from Ju Jajiang. That heart that had been hanging on by a thread finally died for good. Can Ju Jajiang still win his wife back? In the previous episode, we got to the part where Ju Jajiang asked what Jim Dan was doing. The coach sniffled, his face full of embarrassment. He told Jajiang, during the hospitalization, Teacher Dan already submitted a resignation letter. Ju Jajiang simply couldn't believe it on the spot. The coach said he had tried desperately to persuade him to stay, but Teacher Dan's attitude was absolutely firm. Ju Jajiang still asked why with a confused look on his face. And in that instant, the coach really wanted to slap him twice more. After all, after the match ended, he had treated Teacher Dan like that, and now he actually had the nerve to ask why. Jim Dan, Teacher Dan, was really a good person. Before leaving, he even organized all the handover materials clearly, which was truly a pity. The coach had no choice but to use the break to look for another physical therapist. A flash of shock passed through Ju Jajiang's eyes. He should have realized it sooner. On the eve of the match, he had already started acting very strange. completely different from usual. From that moment on, he must have already been preparing to resign. Before leaving, Jim Dan only did a simple packing of his luggage. During this period, he had hardly bought anything. But as soon as he looked up, he saw Halmiani's cabinet. He slowly walked over, quietly leaned against the cabinet. He decided to fulfill Halmiani's final wish. Halmiani had originally lived by the sea on the western side. The sea there was beautiful, but later she was busy fleeing and never managed to go back. Halmiani stroked Jim Dan's face and said she still wanted to go back and see that sea again. Together with Jim Dan, his thoughts were quickly pulled back to reality. Jim Dan didn't know how he should say goodbye to Ju Jajayong, so he wrote a resignation letter and left it in Ju Jajayong's living room. Although some sad things had happened during this period, but there really had been some good times, so he couldn't just walk away lightly. Whenever he thought of all that had happened in the past, Jim Dan felt that from now on, Ju Jajayong probably wouldn't need him anymore. He also bore responsibility for this competition. Maybe leaving like this would be better for both of them. Jim Dan couldn't help but let out a laugh. Maybe he was never worthy of this job to begin with. But even if he was going to leave, he still had to say something. He took out paper and pen and thought for a moment. Saying goodbye face-to-face would only be more awkward and even harder to bring up, so he left behind only a farewell letter. Then he left without looking back. What on earth had happened to drive Ju Jajayong into such a fury? In the previous episode, it was mentioned that Ju Jajayong learned about Jim Dan's resignation. Because of this, he didn't even care about his injuries and immediately decided to go home and get to the bottom of it. On the way back to the capital, he was still quite certain. I didn't approve it, how dare he resign. But as soon as he reached the door, he suddenly stopped. Two staff members were about to haul away and recycle Jim Dan Halmiani's cabinet. Ju Jajayong's heart instantly sank. He practically rushed over to push the door open. His throat tightened, but he still shouted Jim Dan's name at the top of his lungs. Jim Dan, where are you? Who gave you permission to take that cabinet? But before he could finish his words, he saw that in the bedroom, there was already no trace of Jim Dan. Only a single letter lay quietly on the desk. Ju Jajayong froze for half a second, then grabbed the letter and began to read it word by word. Player Zhou, I've caused you trouble during this period of time. By rights, I should say goodbye to you in person, but I think Player Zhou probably doesn't want to see me either, so I'm leaving this letter. I'm very sorry. It was me who ruined the match. From today on, I resign from my job as a full-time physical therapist. At the same time, I will also move out of your place. Thank you for taking me in during this time. I've already organized all the materials for handover. The debt Player Zhou paid off for me, I will transfer back to you at the end of every month. And also Halmiani's hospitalization fees. I also hope Player Zhou can take good care of himself. May your shoulder injury recover soon as well. But it was as if Ju Jajayong still hadn't reacted. Jim Dan had really left. He turned the whole house upside down, yet he still couldn't find a trace of Jim Dan. In the end, he walked into the bedroom. Alone, he quietly sat down. He hadn't even taken the clothes that had been given to him. Ju Jajayong grabbed that piece of clothing in one motion. Jim Dan's figure flashed again in his mind. The next second, he flung the clothing away with force. He couldn't accept that Jim Dan had just left him like this. All right, Season 1 ends here. Let's wait together for Season 2. Blushing Curse Special. The pure-hearted little Gamja comes online. He's already been eaten clean and wiped dry, yet he's still thinking about taking responsibility for the other person. Gamja, don't be so innocent. The story starts from after Choi Hee-sung found out about the relationship between Ju Jajayong and Danbua. He went alone to a restaurant to drown his sorrows in alcohol. And then he ran into our little Gamja. With the help of the alcohol, the two of them quickly got to talking. It was as if something was pushing Choi Hee-sung along, and he opened his mouth to invite Gamja to his place for some ramyeon. The simple-minded Gamja agreed right away. But who could have known that what Hee-sung tasted that night was thick, rich Gamja puree? The one who suffered the most, however, was Gamja. Other people black out when they drink, but he remembered everything with perfect clarity. Seeing his reaction, Choi Hee-sung finally realized Gamja was genuinely pure-hearted. He hadn't expected Gamja to take the bait so easily either, but he felt that it wasn't bad at all. So he even added an egg for him, wanting to reward him properly before sending him home. But just as he was handing the ramyeon to Gamja, Gamja suddenly stood up and apologized. About last night, I was too rash. From now on, I'll take responsibility. I won't let you regret it. I'm really sorry. That left Choi Hee-sung completely dumbfounded. Is this kid stupid or what? What did I just hear? Does he even realize that the one who should be taking responsibility is actually me? The moment that thought popped into my head, I suddenly felt caught in a dilemma. To ease the awkwardness, Choi Hee-sung quickly changed the subject. So, what did you think of last night's Gamja puree? Just looking at your expression, I can tell you remember everything. But Gamja isn't my type. But judging from last night's performance, it was actually pretty good. He's also kind of cute. What's even worse is, the things he does are cute too. Hizu immediately seized the chance. Fine, then I'll take responsibility and give it a try. If I tell you to come whenever I call, can you do it? Because you have to take responsibility for me. Gamja's face flushed red, and he said in a low voice, I can. After Jim Dan left, Ju Jajayong instantly turned into an empty nest Noljin Dweji. No one was allowed to mention Jim Dan's name. He even dreamed of Danbua dropping little pearls in his sleep. His soul was completely gone, leaving only helpless fury. So you have days like this too? Huh. Ha 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 ha. The first day without Jim Dan. Noljin Dweji woke up alone on the 800 square meter king-size bed. He stubbornly slung his bag over his shoulder despite his injuries. He walked into the empty, spacious living room, ate breakfast alone, went out alone to the boxing gym, and dragged on like this for a month. Park Jong's arm recovered more slowly than expected, and the doctor added, young master needs rest. He can't exercise. Ju Jajayong's mood got even worse. The shadow of that failed match still hadn't lifted. I worked so hard all this time to guard that champion spot. It's all that Baek Junmyeong guy's fault. He thought he'd just go home and relax by watching some TV. But on the TV program, the host outright condemned him for competing while injured. He got so mad he switched the TV off on the spot. What kind of insanity are they talking about? If he wasn't gonna watch TV, then he might as well check his phone. But as soon as he opened it, it was all malicious news headlines. The phone wasn't much better either. Ju Jajayong just felt that nothing was going right. It was like the whole world was against him, and his head was buzzing with pain. By the time it was late into the night, he still couldn't fall asleep. He stood in front of the liquor cabinet, staring at it for quite a while. He casually opened a bottle and tilted his head back to gulp it down. Ever since Jim Dan left, his insomnia had gotten even worse. He had tried every method he could think of, but nothing worked. Even drinking didn't help. When he finally managed to fall asleep, a dark shadow appeared in his dream, whispering by his ear, "Look at the state you're in now. What kind of great being do you think you are? You're nothing more than someone who isn't even as good as a worm. You've never been able to do anything. Whether in the past or now, you've always been just trash." He jolted awake from the dream. Say what you will, but this face really was handsome. At that moment, his manager called him. Today, they were going to interview a new physical therapist. When they arrived at the training center, the manager took one look at his condition and was shocked. "What happened to you? Why are you drinking again?" Noljin Dweji still had that same rotten temper. "So what? I can't drink." "It's not that you can't drink. Come on, let me introduce you. This is the therapist who's here for the interview today." The man introduced himself very earnestly, but Noljin Dweji didn't take in a single word. His mind was filled with how Jim Dan had looked on the first day he came to the training center. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he felt, and the manager asked him, "What do you think of this person?" A little later, there will be other people coming for interviews. Ju Jajayong was not in the mood to see anyone else, just him. The manager was very shocked. Obviously, it was this kid who had rushed him to immediately find a new therapist. How could he decide so hastily? Was it because he was injured and had also lost the match? It was the first time he had ever seen Ju Jajayong so careless, even drinking alcohol when he usually would not touch a single drop. Looks like this loss really hit him hard. "Fine then, we'll do as you say and choose this person." "What a pity, clearly Jim Dan is the one most suitable for you." Ju Jajayong reacted instantly, on edge. "Don't you dare mention Jim Dan again." His head started to ache again. When he went home that night, he was like a loner, falling asleep directly on the sofa. The person who appeared in his dream this time was Jim Dan. Danbua was crying in his dream. "Player Ju, do you not trust me?" Noljin Dweji jolted awake in fright. His heartbeat was a chaotic mess, and the irritation surged up with it. "Damn it, what exactly do you want from me to be satisfied?" Ju Jajayong found a stand-in who looked like Jim Dan. In the end, he realized that he simply could not do without Jim Dan. Whenever anyone else got close, his head would start to hurt. Later, he even received Danbua's repayment transfer at 11 a.m. He was so angry his face was practically twisted. "Ha ha ha," the manager said again. "Jim Dan is the therapist most suitable for him." Ju Jajayong didn't say anything, but in his heart he felt that Danbua was nothing more than an accessory. Although everyone around him thought there was no way Jim Dan would do something to hurt Noljin Dweji. Noljin Dweji also shouldn't have lashed out at Jim Dan without confirming the facts. And Jim Dan's expression and tears didn't look fake either. But Ju Jajayong still felt he wasn't wrong. It was Jim Dan who wasn't open enough, and that was why he was suspected. Wasn't it precisely because he understood this that he left? Thinking of this, Nuljan Dweji began to doubt himself. Why am I still so hung up on this? I shouldn't have let him move into my place in the first place. Sherbal, why does my head still hurt even after taking medicine? He thought it over. Forget it, as long as I do what I used to do and just find someone else to fill in, it'll be fine. I'm sure I'll be able to forget him soon enough. That day, Ju Jajayong went to 98. A little boy next to him scooted over. Hi, you're player Ju Jajayong, right? Nuljan Dweji glanced sideways at him. That boy actually looked a bit like Jim Dan. Then I'll use him as a substitute and see how it goes. Unfortunately, the heavens weren't on Nuljan Dweji's side. It turned out that finding a stand-in didn't work at all. On the contrary, it just triggered his headache again. He dumped the kid on the spot and turned around to leave. The next day, the cleaning crew came over to tidy up. Seeing the state Nuljan Dweji was in, it was clear he hadn't slept the whole night again. The cleaning lady helped him gather up the empty bottles and casually asked him if they should clean the guest room upstairs as well. That was the room Donboy used to live in, and no one had touched it since he left. Ju Jajayong fell silent for a moment, then said, "Fine, go ahead and clean it." The cleaning crew finished tidying up very quickly. In the guest room's trash can, the cleaning lady found this, and seeing that it looked expensive, she didn't dare just throw it away. After the cleaners left, Nuljan Dweji remembered that keychain. He recalled the nervous yet shy tone in Jim Dan's voice when he gave him the gift. So this is what it was. At that moment, he caught a glimpse of another envelope inside the bag. He opened it and saw it was a letter from Jim Dan to him. "Dear player Injayong, happy birthday. I've always been very grateful for the help you've given me. Thanks to you, I finally started to feel like I could breathe a little. I prepared a gift with my gratitude in mind, but I don't know if you'll like it. At work, I'll push myself even harder. I want to keep working with you." The last line had the words "actually" I crossed out, and a large section after that was scribbled over. Nuljan Dweji was annoyed. What the hell is this supposed to say? What was he originally trying to write at the end? His hands were shaking so badly when he gave the gift. What on earth was he trying to say? His phone notification sound suddenly went off. He unlocked his phone, and his brows immediately furrowed. It was a text message about a transfer from Jim Dan 11 a.m. It was written on that note from Donbwa that he owed money to Nuljan Dweji. He would pay him back on the last day of every month. Ju Jajayong was exasperated to the point of laughing. "You've got to be kidding, with just this little money each time. How long is it going to take to pay off?" Over there, after Jim Dan finished the transfer, he lifted his head and looked up at the sky. He could finally see how Donbo was doing now. He hoped the baby could live happily even on his own. Jim Dan finally made his official appearance. Halmiani was still alive, which was really such a relief. The grandmother and grandson looked like they were doing okay. Looking back at Ju Jajayong, he had completely broken down. He was ready to dig 3 feet into the ground if he had to, just to find Jim Dan. Jim Dan was living with Halmiani in the countryside by the sea. He was still working as a physical therapist. He hadn't changed his old profession. It was in the nursing home where Halmiani lived. He helped many patients with their rehabilitation. When he was at work, he was as serious and reliable as ever. All his colleagues felt that, with his skills, he could easily go somewhere better. But he stayed in the countryside for Halmiani's sake. He was truly very filial. What's more, he had such a handsome face. Who could see him and not like him? Donbwa looked at Halmiani inside the room, chatting with other people. She seemed in good spirits, and her complexion had become a bit rosier. He remembered his earlier conversation with the doctor, who had said they originally thought Halmiani only had 6 months left. But now, seeing that her condition has clearly improved, it might be a reaction after her psychological stress eased. Maybe she'll live a bit longer, and the cancer cells are also spreading very slowly. Bringing Halmiani back to the countryside was really the right thing to do. At night, Jim Dan was massaging Halmiani's legs. He was utterly exhausted, nodding off over and over. "Little Dan, you look terrible. Go back and sleep." But Jim Dan said he'd leave only after Halmiani fell asleep. "I can stay here alone just fine. It'd be better for you to go back to Seoul." I felt really upset inside. Halmiani was afraid of dragging Jim Dan down. "I like it here more too, so don't worry." As he spoke, he pulled the blanket up again. "Cover yourself well, or you'll get cold." After Halmiani fell asleep, only then did he finally dare to show his vulnerability. "I'm so afraid that in the end it'll end up with only me left." On the other side, Ju Jajiang still had heavy dark circles under his eyes. At first, it was only out of curiosity. How could there be someone as timid as Jim Dan, an adult actually scared to that extent? Yet that very appearance instead stirred up an even stronger desire in him to explore. When it comes down to it, Jim Dan is actually pretty good in many ways. Whether it's the way he does things or that humble attitude or even, but as long as it gets in the way of his competitions, no matter how well they get along, it's useless. In the past, no matter who it was, there has never been an exception. But why doesn't it work this time? Why does Jim Dan make me care this much? No matter what he does, his mind is always on Jim Dan. Let me tell you, Nuljan Dweji, this is what love is. Ju Jajiang stopped the car and went to the area where Jim Dan used to live. The place was already being redeveloped and rebuilt. Nuljan Dweji let out a sigh. Oh right, of course he's not here. Wait, why did I run all the way here? Did I really think he'd be here? No, this can't go on. I have to see Jim Dan in person. Talk to him one more time. That's the only way I can keep my emotions under control. So he dialed Jim Dan's number. Turned out to be an invalid number. He actually changed his number. Then he should be with Halmiani. Ju Jajiang immediately rushed to the hospital where Halmiani had stayed before. The nurse said the patient he was asking about was no longer there. Nuljan Dweji felt his heart sink. Could it be that she didn't pass away? It seems she was transferred to another hospital. We can't say anything more. I'm about to lose my mind. And we don't even know which hospital she was transferred to. First the invalid number, then the transfer. Ju Jajiang was truly furious. What the hell, he even took Halmiani with him. Where on earth did he go? Next, Nuljan Dweji practically ran through all the hospitals and gyms in Seoul. He still didn't get the result he wanted. This whole scene, he really did run the entire way. Where the hell has that son of a bitch gone? And with an injured arm on top of that. It's really not easy for him. Ha ha ha. His manager picked up his call. Brother Namuke, help me track down Jim Dan's current location. No matter how much it costs, no matter what method you use, it doesn't matter. You must find Jim Dan. I have to see him. Anyway, he's already run into Jim Dan by chance once. Over there, Ju Jajiang is still sporting dark circles and burning money like crazy to search for him. Nuljan Dweji, look, Gamja and Bunhong Muri are already talking. And you haven't even seen the shadow of your wife. I order you to find him in the next chapter. Our Donbwa is truly a child with a hard life. He lost his parents when he was little. He was even bullied and picked on by kids his own age. Such a tiny child could only hug himself tightly. Fortunately, he still had Halmiani. Yanbo, don't cry. Halmiani is here. Don't cry. Halmiani is right here. Let me see who dares to say that kind of thing. I really want to see who dares. Donbwa, do you want a cookie? The moment he heard there were cookies, he stopped crying right away. He held a cookie bigger than his own face and munched on it happily, with a bottle of banana milk sitting next to him. Halmiani gently stroked his head and said she would always stay with him. Jim Dan nodded with a smile and answered obediently. But in the next second, Halmiani was gone. He hurriedly ran out after her. Halmiani, where are you? Where did you run off to? Didn't you say you would stay with me forever? Halmiani, don't go. I don't want to be alone. Turned out Jim Dan had had a nightmare, and he woke up crying. He could no longer remember what time he fell asleep yesterday. When the landlord uncle came to call him out for a meal, Jim Dan immediately felt guilty. Clearly, he was the one who should have been cooking. But the uncle just smiled and said, I'm a good person, you know? You work very hard and you've paid the rent. Just help me feed the dog later and that's enough. There was a very cute little dog at his place. Fuzun, did you sleep well last night? Fuzun was still a pregnant dog, and she was about to give birth. The uncle asked if he wanted to take one of the puppies, but Jim Dan politely declined again. This feels like foreshadowing. I guess that later on Nuljan Dweji and Jim Dan will take a puppy back to Seoul. While eating, the uncle nagged him like an elder. Don't drink so much alcohol. This scene was just so gentle. Because he hadn't slept well last night, after Jim Dan finished his work, he took a nap in the break room, and he nearly fell asleep again in Halmiani's ward. He was woken up by Halmiani. Little Dan, did you not sleep last night? No, I did sleep. By the way, Halmiani, do you want to go out for a walk after we eat? The sea is really beautiful today. But Halmiani frowned, only worrying as she said, it feels like you're looking more and more haggard. Little Dan, aren't you going back to Seoul? How long are you going to stay here? Once Halmiani dies, you're not going to keep staying here, right? You should go live your own life. Seeing how hard things have been for you since you came here, I'm so worried I can hardly breathe. Jim Dan still coaxed her with a smile. It's okay. I'll make my own decisions properly. Right now, I just want to stay by your side. After walking out of the hospital room, Halmiani's words from just now kept echoing over and over in Jim Dan's mind. He thought of Seoul again, and of the days when he lived at Ju Jaeyoung's place. He quickly lowered his head and forced himself to change the subject. What on earth am I thinking? On the wall-mounted TV over there, news about Ju Jaeyoung was being broadcast. They said he was currently focused on recovering from his injury, and the date of his next match was still uncertain. An older man said angrily, his face full of rage, "A guy with such rotten character deserves to end up like that." The people next to him chimed in as well, but Jim Dan was reminded of the scene from that day. It was Ju Jaeyoung clutching his foot, and the real culprit was that can of spray in his own hand. Whether it was player Ju's incident or Halmini's illness, I feel like it's all my fault. I should have taken Halmini to the hospital earlier, then we wouldn't have missed the best treatment window. I shouldn't have used that can of spray either. I should have realized something was wrong much sooner. That night, Jim Dan once again used alcohol to numb his emotions. In this regard, he was perfectly in sync with Nuljin Dweji. It seemed like they were filming something next to the nursing home. All the co-workers were drawn in and couldn't help but crowd over to watch. With a loud thud, their attention was yanked back in an instant. It was because Jim Dan couldn't stand steadily and bumped into it. He worked the night shift yesterday and still hasn't gone back to sleep. His co-workers advised him not to push himself so hard, saying that if he kept it up, his body would break down first. Danbua now also has the same dark circles as Nuljin Dweji. After going back, he lay down directly under the shade of a tree. The uncle called him over to take a look there. Baksun had her babies. They're so cute it's practically against the rules. Really? The landlord even carried one out to show him. Baksun stayed obedient and didn't fuss. A little dog as angelic as can be. All right, I'm going to make postpartum meals for Baksun. She's always running around outside. I don't even know if she's been eating properly. Looking at Baksun and the little puppies, Jim Dan's mood suddenly improved a lot. Low voices of conversation came from not far away, and Baksun's ears were sharp. She heard it immediately. In an instant, she dashed out with her tail wagging. As the two people drew closer and closer, Jim Dan finally heard what they were saying. The more he listened, the more the voices sounded extremely familiar. It was Bunhong Mori and little Gamja. From the looks of it, they had come specifically to find Baksun. As soon as the two of them saw Jim Dan, they almost froze at the same time. The three of them just stared straight into one another's eyes like that. The moment Gamja saw Jim Dan, he burst into tears and couldn't stop. He told the whole truth about the competition spray. Jim Dan begged them not to tell anyone where he was. Bunhong Mori immediately nodded in agreement. He is still holding a grudge over the time Ju Jaeyoung called him over to watch alchemy. The more Nuljin Dweji torments him, the happier he gets. The three of them once again fell into a silent stare. Jim Dan was stunned. "What are you guys doing here?" "We're here to shoot a movie. Younggu is working as an extra in the crew to make some side money." After that, the air went quiet for several seconds. Gamja ran over with tears welling up in her eyes. "Dr. Dan, how long has it been since we last met? I'm really so happy." Bunhong Mori explained from behind. "Gamja made friends with this dog yesterday, so that's why we came over here. I didn't expect you to be here too. You really gave me a scare. Is this your hometown, Dr. Dan?" "No, I'm just staying here for now." Bunhong Mori wrapped an arm around the two of them. "Anyway, it's really great to run into you. I never thought Coat Huang was your family's dog." Jim Dan gave an awkward smile. "She just had puppies. Do you want to go see them?" The moment Gamja and Bunhong Mori saw Gyewi, they were instantly melted by the cuteness, and Jim Dan turned around to get them some iced water. The little puppies were sleeping soundly in the nest. Jane and Baksun were resting in the shade under the tree. Jim Dan was a bit curious. "Since when did you two get so close?" Gamja's face suddenly turned red. Bunhong Mori's words carried barbs. "The two of us really click with each other. Everything about us just matches. So we got close this quickly." At this moment, the agent's call came in. They had to go back to the set. At the door, they said goodbye to Jim Dan. The hair clip named Gamja was really too cute. Right before leaving, he suddenly said to Bunhong Mori that he wanted to talk to Jim Dan alone for a bit. He turned around and ran back. "Dr. Dan, about the spray on the day of Brother Jaeyoung's match. We know you weren't the one who did it. Everyone in the sports center knows, including Brother Jaeyoung, so everyone feels very guilty." For a moment, Jim Dan didn't know how to respond. "I really liked the time when you worked at the sports center. Dr. Dan, can't you come back?" Jim Dan smiled faintly. "Thank you for your kindness, but I can't keep causing trouble for the sports center and athlete Jaeyoung because of me. Most importantly, I want to stay here even more. And about me being here, I hope only you two know. Don't tell anyone." Of course, Gamja understood who that person was, and he nodded in agreement. He jogged to catch up with Bunhong Mori, and Bunhong Mori couldn't help but sigh. If Ju Jaeyoung found out, he would definitely be shocked. After all, That day, he had stormed over to Bunhong Muri's apartment and questioned directly, "Do you know where Jim Dan is?" He even suspected that Jim Dan's departure had been instigated by Bunhong Muri, and for no reason at all, he went on a rampage. Looks like his mental state is very unstable. When he didn't get the answer he wanted, he stormed off again. Whenever Bunhong Muri thinks of that day, he gets furious. He turned their home upside down and then just patted his butt and left. Of course, Bunhong Muri can't tell Juja Jiang where Jim Dan is. Rather than staying with someone that hot-tempered, it's better to live freely in the countryside. Exactly, let's not butt in. That's what Physician Dan thinks, and that's what Physician Wulju thinks too. In fact, Bunhong Muri also has his own little agenda. Whenever he thinks about Juja Jiang calling him over to watch alchemy, he just feels Nuljan Dweji ought to suffer a bit longer. Anyway, he's just trash. That night, Jim Dan was just about to do the laundry. Gamja and Bunhong Muri arrived carrying food and drinks. Apart from Jim Dan, the other three all drank quite a lot. Jim Dan beat rhythm for them on the side, and he suddenly realized he hadn't laughed like this in a long time. For some unknown reason, he suddenly thought of Juja Jiang. Even though the atmosphere was so happy and so peaceful, he felt even more ill at ease inside. Nuljan Dweji finally found Jim Dan. It was when he was almost swallowed up by the sea. The two of them finally met again. Gamja and Bunhong Muri's movie wrapped filming smoothly. The two people who had been staying here for more than 10 days were leaving as well. Gamja held Jim Dan's hand, and her tears fell all at once. "Dr. Dan, I don't know when we'll be able to meet again. Aren't you going back to Seoul? If you come to Seoul, please make sure to contact me. I'll treat you to a meal." Bunhong Muri also came over. "Dr. Dan, we're leaving. Please say hello to Grandpa for us." Gamja suggested, "Let's take a photo as a keepsake." Jim Dan's colleagues nearby also wanted to be in the shot, and so this very beautiful group photo was taken. In the evening, Jim Dan sat alone by the sea. He had already gotten used to this kind of lonely life in the countryside. The arrival of Gamja and Bunhong Muri had brought him a long-lost sense of joy. Thanks to them, Jim Dan hadn't let his thoughts run wild these past few days. But as soon as they left, a sense of emptiness immediately wrapped around Donghua. He started drinking heavily again. Yet no matter what, he couldn't suppress the turmoil in his heart. Curled up under the blanket, Jim Dan kept telling himself over and over, "It's fine. It's really fine." But that uneasiness still spread all the way into his work. That day, while he was doing rehabilitation for a patient, he spaced out for a second and didn't hold the patient steady. By the time he came to his senses, Jim Dan was completely flustered. The patient's family member pointed at him and cursed him out, warning that if anything happened again, they would sue him directly. The director also stepped forward and bowed in apology together with Jim Dan. "Dr. Dan, you really need to reflect on yourself. Fortunately, you fell on a soft mat today. If you had fallen on the floor, the consequences really would have been very serious." Jim Dan hurriedly bowed his head and apologized to the director again. He had been in the profession for so long and had almost never made such a mistake. So at this moment, he was burning with shame. Recently, Jim Dan could clearly feel Halmiani's life slipping away bit by bit. But there was nothing he could do. When he was alone with Halmiani, he would always reach out to feel for Halmiani's breath at her nose. Only when he confirmed that she was still alive did he dare to let out a sigh of relief. After getting off work and returning to his lodgings, he heard an even worse piece of news. The smallest dog, Hai, suddenly stopped moving. The landlord Ajushi performed CPR on her, but it was completely useless. Jim Dan scooped up little dog Hai in his arms and rushed straight out. He practically raced with all his might to this animal hospital. The vet tried to resuscitate her for a very, very long time. In the end, he could only helplessly shake his head at Jim Dan. Blow after blow weighed down on him until he could hardly breathe. He took the puppy back and buried her together with the landlord Ajushi. "Don't be too sad. All living things die. She just left a little earlier." Baksoon didn't understand what had happened to her little baby or why it was being buried in the soil. She could only whimper and scratch at the dirt with her front paws, one stroke after another. The departure of this little puppy felt like the final straw that crushed Jim Dan. It was as if everything he tried so hard to hold on to would, in the end, slip from his hands. Jim Dan felt completely hollowed out in body and mind. "I'm really so tired." Previously, he worked himself to the bone to pay off his debts, yet still forced a smile at life. But now, all the negative emotions have piled up to the top. Jim Dan's consciousness feels floaty. He walks out of the house. He's going to see Halmiani. Halmiani doesn't have much time left. If he wants to see her, he should go now. After seeing Halmiani, he plans to go take his shift at the hospital. If he keeps busy, he won't overthink. But the path he's taking is not to the hospital at all. Instead, he's walking step by step into the sea. The seawater is about to reach his chest. The sea breeze blows his hair into a mess. Jim Dan closes his eyes, his body swaying badly, about to fall the next second. At that moment, a large hand from behind suddenly yanks him back. Ju Jajayong grabs the about-to-fall Jim Dan in one swift motion and says through gritted teeth, "What exactly are you trying to do right now?" Ju Jajayong only confirmed Jim Dan's location through the group photo. Only then did he manage to pull him back at the last second. It has to be said, the smooth-furred Nuljan Dweji is really handsome. He suggests that Jim Dan come back and continue working as his physical therapist. But Jim Dan refuses outright and very harshly at that. Is the most anticipated chasing his wife storyline about to begin? Nuljan Dweji is almost scared out of his mind. Are you crazy? Running into the sea in the middle of the night? He carries Jim Dan back onto the shore. Hey, wake up! Come on. No matter how he shakes him, there's no reaction. Only then does Jim Dan slowly regain consciousness. The view before his eyes was blurry. It was Nuljan Dweji's face, and Jim Dan froze. How strange. Why am I seeing player Ju right in front of me? At the entrance of the sanatorium, the medical staff were so startled on the spot. Nuljan Dweji rushed in with Jim Dan on his back. Can you take emergency patients here? The director looked completely dumbfounded. Why yes, please come this way. Jim Dan was on an 4-drip, lying on the hospital bed. He slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he turned his head, he saw Ju Jajayong. His hair smoothed down made him look so young, like he had suddenly become 10 years younger. Nuljan Dweji noticed that he had woken up. Player Ju. Hey, why did you just have to run into the sea at that exact moment? If I hadn't stopped you, you almost died. Were you trying to kill yourself? Jim Dan looked baffled. What do you mean? I was on my way to the hospital. You clearly walked into the sea by yourself. Jim Dan still had no recollection. When? How come I don't remember? He slowly sat up. The two of them stared at each other for a few seconds, and neither spoke. In the end, Jim Dan was the one who asked first. How did you know I was here? For that, we really have to thank little Sidu. The fighters at the boxing gym were heckling him, saying they wanted to see the photos he took when he went to film, and told him to post them in the group chat. Sidu immediately opened his gallery. I took a whole bunch. A loyal heart went and dragged Jim Dan, the dogs, Happy the rats, and the doves. Even the group photo got roped in. Break time ended, and they had to keep training. Gamja put down his phone and walked off, and the photo was already sent. In no time, Nuljan Dweji suddenly shoved the door open. Hey, Bean! Hey, Sergeant Bean! Panting heavily, he held up his phone. What is this? Explain it to me right now. That night, Nuljan Dweji drove straight over to find him. Driving with one hand is very dangerous. Don't do that, everyone. He happened to glance casually to the side. And wouldn't you know it, Jim Dan just so happened to be out there in the sea. But he didn't tell Jim Dan any of this, only tossed out one line. You don't need to know. May I ask, did you come here because of me? Nuljan Dweji was still being stubborn. You don't need to know about that, Jim Dan said. Come back and be my physical therapist. Danbo froze on the spot as soon as he heard that, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. What? He immediately added, I don't want to. I can't go back to being your physical therapist anymore. Nuljan Dweji's brows instantly furrowed. Is it because of Halmiani? Even if it's not because of Halmiani, I have no reason to work with you anymore. I've already resigned. Ju Jajayong refused to give up. Didn't you say you weren't the one who used that can of spray? I know it wasn't you too. He really knew how to pick the sharpest thing to say. Jim Dan was reminded again of how he had questioned him back then. Aren't you short of money? No one is going to pay you a higher salary than I do. With that pitiful little pay of yours, how long will it take to pay off your debts? Work with me and you'll be able to pay them off soon. Jim Dan cut him off directly. No, I don't want to take your money anymore, and I don't want to work with you anymore either. This time, it was Nuljan Dweji's turn to be stunned. No matter how he tried to persuade him, Jim Dan still forced himself to get up and leave. He even yanked out the 4-line directly, ruthless like a werewolf. His own arm was still bleeding, yet he turned around and told Nuljan Dweji to be careful on the way. Ju Jajayong was still in shock. I thought that as long as I tempted him with money, he would come back. So you want to play it this way? Fine. Nuljan Dweji, I advise you to chase your wife properly and stop messing around. That pig brain of Ju Jajayong still hadn't caught up. He was already in love with Jim Dan. He was currently at the stage where his left and right brain were fighting. He was still toughing it out with his mouth, saying that once Jim Dan healed his pig trotter, the two of them would part ways and go back to Seoul. But on the other hand, he kept worrying about the arm Jim Dan had pulled the needle from last time and kept running over every day, throwing his warm face against a cold one. Dambwa didn't say anything. his face full of helplessness. After saving Jim Dan last time, Noljin Dweji went back to Seoul. The doctor said he didn't need to wear a brace on his arm anymore. As long as he did rehab diligently, he would recover soon. Ju Jaeyoung decided to go find Jim Dan and ask him to help with his rehab. When he was exercising at home, he couldn't help thinking, it'd be great if I could get my muscles loosened up every day, just like before, when Jim Dan was still by his side. If I want to get back to my peak, I need Jim Dan. As long as I can sit on the champion's throne again, this damned headache and insomnia will definitely disappear. And these indescribable emotions should also calm down. Once I achieve my goal, it won't matter even if I part ways with Jim Dan again. Noljin Dweji, you really are a fool. So he once again set off for the countryside. Over there, Jim Dan was working earnestly. A coworker called him to go to the director's office. When he pushed open the office door, he saw Noljin Dweji sitting there all casually. Player Ju, what are you doing here? Isn't it obvious? I'm here for treatment. The director was a bit nervous. I heard you two know each other? How come a famous athlete like you chose our hospital? I want to do my shoulder rehabilitation here. Noljin Dweji turned his head and said to Jim Dan, hey, you're in charge. The director explained, we mainly treat cancer here, so our specialty might not be the right fit. Ju Jaeyoung didn't listen at all. Anyway, Jim Dan had experience, he knew what to do. Besides, I'm getting treatment here, which is also publicity for your hospital. You can take photos with me, and you can put up my signature too. Your hospital takes donations as well, right? The director was moved on the spot, feeling that what he saw in front of him wasn't a person, but a glowing mountain of gold. All the colleagues were talking about Ju Jaeyoung, their eyes practically glued to his face and body. Dr. Dan, I heard you know player Ju. He specially came here to do rehab for you. That's so loyal of him. Jim Dan replied flatly, I'm not close with him. The colleague was even more puzzled. But it seems like player Ju also knows your Halmiani, right? In the hospital room, Noljin Dweji was sitting by the bed, chatting with Halmiani. As soon as Halmiani saw him, she was delighted, and even said distressedly that he had lost weight. Jim Dan hurried to the doorway and saw this warm, harmonious scene. Halmiani was still affectionately holding Noljin Dweji's hand, asking how he ended up coming here. I came to ask Jim Dan to help me with rehab and also to drop by and see Halmiani. His sweet words coaxed Halmiani into bursting with laughter. Donbua at the door was, for a moment, at a loss for words. He called Ju Jaeyoung outside the hospital. Player Ju, you can't do this. This is where I work. So what? You're not going back to Seoul anyway. That's why I came here for treatment. The director has no objections, and Halmiani is very happy to have me. At that moment, he suddenly noticed the arm where Jim Dan had pulled the needles last time was covered in a large bruise. He yanked the person over, his voice tightening. What happened to your arm? Jim Dan shook off his hand directly. I don't need you to worry about it. I still have to work. Aren't you very busy too? Hurry up and go back. Once again, he left only his back to Noljin Dweji. Ju Jaeyoung froze on the spot, thinking back to that day. Was it then that he got hurt? He was a bit angry, but this anger was something he could only swallow for a while. Jim Dan hid in the bathroom, his expression dark and chaotic. He suddenly remembered all the nasty things Ju Jaeyoung had done back in Seoul. He gripped his elbow hard, a chill in his heart. When has he ever cared about my physical condition? In the days that followed, Jim Dan pretended not to hear anything Ju Jaeyoung said to him. Even when the other man blared his horn like crazy, he didn't react at all. Every time the treatment ended, he left immediately, cutting things off as cleanly as a slice. Ju Jaeyoung was furious. I want to see just how long you can keep ignoring me. The pig brain suddenly had a flash of insight and directly rented the room next to Jim Dan's. Faced with the Ajushi's question, Noljin Dweji hooked up a faint smile. The air here is good. It's suitable for recuperation. He glanced at Jim Dan from the corner of his eye. Since we've become neighbors, please take care of me from now on. Jim Dan was very helpless and could only sigh in silence. The boxer instantly transformed into free-farm labor. Not only did the progress of chasing his wife fail to increase, it even went backward into the negatives. Jim Dan misunderstood that it was because of that curse that he kept biting and wouldn't let go, insisting on taking him back to Seoul. The misunderstood Noljin Dweji was completely furious, the pressure around him dropping like he was about to explode. The villagers were especially enthusiastic toward Ju Jaeyoung, crowding around him asking for autographs. Jim Dan only felt the pressure crushing him so hard he couldn't breathe. Player Ju came to this village because of me, so he called Noljin Dweji outside. Ju Jaeyoung thought he had finally relented and was willing to return to Seoul. But the words Jim Dan spoke hit him like a blunt blow to the head. What am I, that I'm worth you going this far? There are plenty of therapists better than me. I don't understand why you have to waste your time here. You're right, maybe you just don't understand. Anyway, I just want you to keep being my therapist. Do you have a problem with that? You don't reject working with me either, right? I saw that letter. The letter said, living with you, I can finally breathe easier. It was on my birthday, the letter you wrote to me. Don't you remember? Jim Dan thought of the gift that had been thrown into the trash can. But that letter is nothing more than trash now. The feelings from that time are already gone. Nuljan Dweji couldn't believe it. How could he call a densely written letter trash? But Jim Dan kept going. When I worked with you, I also felt a sense of achievement. Every time you won, I felt like I had contributed too. So I was very gratified, but now, I no longer have any reason to keep working with you. I also can't guarantee that I won't make that kind of mistake again. I don't have the confidence to take on that kind of risk again. Nuljan Dweji panicked. That thing wasn't even something you did. As soon as he said it, he remembered how he had heartlessly shaken off Jim Dan's hand back then. Feeling guilty and lacking confidence, he turned his face away and let out a quiet sigh. Jim Dan seemed to have made up his mind. You shouldn't be wasting your time here. No matter what, my answer won't change. Nuljan Dweji was still thinking about Jim Dan's words while he was out running. That was really a ruthless thing to say. The village chief waved him over to chat, wanting his help to carry the cucumbers that had just been harvested at home. The strength of a boxer like Nuljan Dweji was no joke. In no time at all, he was done moving them. An uncle nearby also came over to ask for his help. Then there were everyone's sauce crocks that needed scrubbing. The roof of the elderly Halmiani's house needed repairs. The landlord uncle also came running to order him around. While helping the uncle move soil, he suddenly snapped to, why am I doing all this? It's all because of Jim Dan that I'm suffering like this. By the end of the day, he had received quite a lot of vegetables from the villagers. What on earth am I doing? I never thought that just to take Jim Dan away. He even went out of his way to rent a place right next to him. And now, I've even ended up doing something like this. But Jim Dan seems more and more off. Has he always been this cold? Should I just tie him up and drag him straight back to Seoul? Nuljan Dweji comes over next door and calls out to Donbwa, hey, you're off work? Come by my place today and help me do some therapy. Jim Dan originally wanted to refuse, but the uncle also spoke up for Nuljan Dweji, saying he really had a hard day. In the end, he had no choice but to go next door, and Ju Jajiang started to persuade him. Don't overthink it. I think only by returning to the kind of environment you had before is there a chance you can stand back up again. You just need to keep your old pre-match habits and give me therapy like you used to. I think that's also a part of the magic fingers. The words magic fingers suddenly seemed to awaken Jim Dan, so it was because of those magic fingers. Nuljan Dweji still hadn't noticed anything wrong. Yeah, once I'm back sitting in the champion's seat again. By then, whatever you want to do has nothing to do with me. I knew it, that's exactly what you were thinking. To you, I'm nothing more than a tool to Jechu the magic fingers. Ju Jajiang lifts his pig head. What did you say? So it really is like that? Why didn't you just make it clear from the start? Compared to working a part-time job here, making a deal with you and earning over 10 million a month is obviously much more cost-effective. Then let's do it the way we did before. As long as I pay back all the money I owe you, then you'll have no reason to keep staying here. Nuljan Dweji was stunned. Jim Dan? What on earth are you talking about? Cut the crap, this isn't like you. Ju Jajiang's brows were almost knotted together. After the shock, his anger shot straight up. Sherbal, fine, you said it yourself, so don't regret it. Ju Jajiang once again caught Jim Dan sleepwalking. He once again slung him over his shoulder and carried him back. From Jim Dan Halmiani and the landlord grandpa's place. He could hear it clearly. Something really wasn't right with Jim Dan lately. Nuljan Dweji, hey, you should feel a little heartache for your wife too. Ever since that day when Jim Dan said he was just a tool, every time Ju Jajiang remembered that sentence, a nameless fire would flare up in his chest. But no matter what, he was going to take Jim Dan away, because the match was about to start up again. If he wanted to return to peak condition, he had to keep Jim Dan by his side. I'm taking him away only because of that curse. There's no other reason. Nuljan Dweji, you're just running away. Have you already realized that you've started to feel something else for Donbwa? A sudden light went on in that pig brain of his, and he decided to start with Halmiani. Let Halmiani come forward and help persuade Jim Dan to come back. So he went straight to the nursing home. He pushed Halmiani out for a walk, and Halmiani was smiling especially happily. On the way, Halmiani kept introducing this village to him. I heard you came here to recuperate because of an injury. Are you better now? Halmiani asked. Nuljan Dweji also suddenly realized that his condition had indeed improved a lot since coming here, and he replied, I'm almost healed. How is your health, Halmiani? I'm still the same as always. Being able to take a walk with such a famous player, I'm really blessed. But how did little Dan end up working with you? Is he really that capable? Yes, he's very capable. Nuljan Dweji was praising Jim Dan's therapy skills with his mouth, but his heart had already drifted off somewhere else. I really have to thank you so much, Player Jew. Not only do you pay little Dan a salary, you even let him live at your place. He's never introduced anyone to me like this before. You're the first one. So, I feel like you're my grandson too. Halmiani gently patted Ju Jajayang's hand. I'll be entrusting little Dan to you from now on. He's had such a hard time because of being dragged down by me. He lost his parents when he was very young. When he had just learned to talk, he kept calling me Mom. Every time I heard it, my heart almost broke. I tried my best to raise him well, but maybe it still wasn't enough. He became especially sensible at such a young age, like a little adult, and he almost never gave me any trouble. But up until a few years ago, he was still always drinking and even smoking. When Nuljan Dweji heard this, he froze on the spot. He even smokes this? Halmiani replied, he said he's too tired, and this is the only way he can relax a little. Ju Jajayang had never seen Jim Dan smoke, and he couldn't picture it at all. He clearly looked so well behaved. Truly, you can't judge a person by appearances. Halmiani said she doesn't have long to live, and that Ju Jajayang being able to come all the way here to look for Jim Dan must mean that he really cherishes Jim Dan, so Halmiani is also willing to trust Nuljan Dweji. I hope you can take him back to Seoul. Although this was originally Ju Jajayang's intention, he was still a bit surprised that Halmiani brought it up herself. The main reason is, Halmiani feels that something has been very wrong with Jim Dan's condition lately. It looks like he hardly sleeps and never goes to see a doctor. Nuljan Dweji frowned. When did this start? It has been a long time. The medical conditions here aren't good enough. Little Dan should go to a big hospital in Seoul for a checkup. If this goes on, I'm afraid you'll truly regret it for the rest of your lives. After listening, Ju Jajayang's face immediately darkened. At night, he kept thinking over Halmiani's words. Just then, the sound of a dog barking suddenly came from outside. He immediately went out to check. He saw Baksoon chasing after Jim Dan, barking madly at him. Jim Dan was walking unsteadily, not even wearing shoes. Ju Jajayang hurried to catch up. Hey, where are you going in the middle of the night? Jim Dan kept walking forward as if he hadn't heard. Ju Jajayang rushed up in one step. Have you been drinking? I'm asking you, where are you going? With that one tug, Jim Dan's whole body toppled straight toward the ground. Ju Jajayang quickly supported him, making his movements very gentle. Only then did he realize he was actually still asleep. The landlord grandpa came out when he heard the commotion. He ran out again today? Recently, as soon as night falls, it's like something is pulling this kid around, making him wander back and forth. Let's get him back to his room first. When they pulled open Jim Dan's door, they saw that he had indeed drunk quite a lot. Nuljan Dweji looked utterly shocked. Since when has he been like this? Grandpa let out a sigh. It seems like he became this way not long after he came here, and lately it's gotten even worse. I'm really afraid he'll fall into the sea one of these days. Sometimes he can go out several times in a single night. Looks like I can only keep my eyes on him all night tonight. Ju Jajayang was silent for a few seconds. Grandfather, I'll take him over to my place and watch him. Ju Jajayang forcibly took Jim Dan to Seoul to see a doctor. He insisted, saying, I'm only doing this because Halmiani asked me to. What's the point of you saying, you're really worried too? Anyway, you damn pig, you. When on earth are you gonna manage to get yourself a wife? Nuljan Dweji carried the sleepwalking Jim Dan back to the room. As the smell of alcohol hit him, he immediately covered his nose. What business of mine is this? Why did I even bring him back? He remembered the things Halmiani had said. He sighed again. Is he like this because he hasn't slept well? He was just about to turn around and leave. Wow, so Nuljan Dweji has such a gentlemanly side. The next second, his clothes were grabbed in one swift motion. As if having a nightmare, Jim Dan cried and said, Don't leave me alone. Clinging to him like this made Nuljan Dweji think of the last time Jim Dan got drunk. Shit, he's way too annoying when he's drunk. In the morning, Danbo got a huge fright. Ju Jajayang told him in full detail about his sleepwalking yesterday. Danbo got another scare. Nuljan Dweji froze for a moment. Then he just felt completely baffled. He was so angry that he smashed the pillow against the door. I'm clearly helping him, yet he doesn't appreciate it at all. I've been giving way to him all this time and he just thinks I'm easy to push around. Is that it? Just then, his phone suddenly rang. His manager sent a text, telling him to come by the gym. Ju Jajayang went back to Seoul and finished handling the matter. He also asked his manager to help inquire about news from the hospital. Before he left, the manager stopped him. Jajayang, I don't even know what you've been doing outside lately. Stop staying by yourself. come to the gym. Hasn't your hand healed too? You're acting very strange. You haven't come to the gym for a long time. I'm really worried about you. It's still not the right time. I'll handle it myself. You don't need to worry. He went home to pack his clothes, but his mind kept spinning. Why am I going this far for Jim Dan? Even if it's because of the curse. Is he really worth all this from me? Besides, he's still carrying a flaw now. Noljin Dweji turned his head and looked at that keychain. He reached out, picked it up, and clenched it in his palm. He understood all the logic, but he just couldn't let go of Jim Dan. So he made up his mind. No matter how stubborn Jim Dan was, it wouldn't work. Today they'd see who's more headstrong, who can hold out longer. In the little country courtyard, the sparrows were in the middle of their romance, but they were scared off and took flight by Jim Dan's sudden shout. What are you doing? Put me down quickly. Turns out it was Noljin Dweji who suddenly hoisted Danbwa up onto his shoulder. The landlord Ajusi asked what they were arguing about, and after hearing that Juja Jiang was taking Jim Dan to a hospital in Seoul, he finally felt at ease and said, "Be careful on the road, you two." Noljin Dweji watched him walk off into the distance, and the Ajusi was still sighing, saying their relationship was really good. Bok Sun even barked once in agreement. Jim Dan had just been stuffed into the car and was already grabbing at the car door, saying, "I'm perfectly healthy. Let me out," which made Noljin Dweji so mad again that he nearly exploded. "You think I want to do this? I'm annoyed too. Okay?" Halmiani begged me to take you to the hospital. She said if we keep letting you go on like this, you'll die far from home. Jim Dan's eyes went wide. And me? Yeah. So sit still and be quiet. It's a long drive to Seoul. Bringing up Halmiani really worked. Jim Dan immediately behaved himself. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctor rattled on, and no one understood a word. Jim Dan asked in shock, "Really? This pig mouth of Ju Jajiang's really can't spit out a single nice word." He's clearly worried about Jim Dan's health, yet he just refuses to say it out loud. Someone please feed him some mute medicine so he'll never open his mouth again. The doctor said that Jim Dan is already in a very dangerous state now. Insomnia plus sleepwalking. If this continues to be ignored, an accident is very likely to happen. The cause might be a physical problem, or it might be psychological factors. In the short term, he has to come back for a follow-up every week. Jim Dan himself hadn't expected it to be this serious. Noljin Dweji spoke in a heavy tone. "You heard what the doctor said, didn't you?" And the doctor also specifically stressed that the patient cannot be left alone at night. Someone must be there at all times to check his condition. Danbwa was completely unconcerned. Is it really necessary to exaggerate it this much? Also, why do you care so much about this? Juja Jiang was so angry that he let out a laugh. It's not asking the landlord to watch your sleep. Is it asking the landlord's grandpa to watch? Or the landlord Halmiani? You've dragged it out until now and still refuse to get treatment. Even saying, "I'll handle it myself." You make sure you go for your follow-ups on time. Do you think, in your current state, you can still continue to be a competent assistant? This sentence suddenly made Jim Dan see the light. So this was the reason. He wanted to get out of the car and go home by himself. But Noljin Dweji couldn't figure out what he was making a fuss about this time. Do you have any money? You didn't even bring your wallet. It's so late now. Come to my place. Jim Dan was unbelievably stubborn. I'm not going there. Juja Jiang was so angry he slammed down on the accelerator. You really are unbelievably disobedient. The hotel front desk said there were no standard rooms left. God himself was helping Noljin Dweji. You're not willing to go to my place.